Hello, all you beautiful gems. Good evening, good evening. Happy Wednesday. Move this over. How's everyone doing? Let's turn this down. Oh, I still have the filter on for the green screen. Hey, LB. Give me a second. Chroma key. There we go. That's better. Look at my new sweatshirt. You like it? I got it on sale. It was buy one, get two free. So my daughter and I went shopping, and I'm gonna turn this down a little bit. She got like a magical girl one, and I got this, and the other one is a what's it called? Oh, it's come right out of my head. Little Witch. Kiki's delivery service. And it has like the cat and flowers all down the arm. Hi, Alistair. Here but playing my time. Perfect. No worries. Yeah, it was Hot Topic. Yeah. It was like on the clearance rack, and it was buy one, get two free. So I think we ended up paying $16 for each shirt, which is like extremely reasonable. Yeah. Yeah, we paid like we paid like $50 with tax kind of thing. Yeah. So, and they had it in our sizes. Like they had this and the other one in a 1X, and Lily got a large. So, yeah. So, it's very cozy and very warm, but it is a light color, and we had spaghetti tonight, so I was like, it's super comfy. It's very comfy. And the thing I like to be able to roll up my sleeves with sweatshirts. If I can't roll them up, like, you know, the one that I got, the Powerpuff Girl one that I got from Urban Planet, it's tight around the sleeves and I can't roll it up, and that bugs me, because especially if I'm drawing or working at the computer or anything like that, I want like 3/4 sleeves, you know? But yeah, how's everybody doing? I had such a weird week. I was really low energy all week. I the other reason I'm wearing this, I got very badly burnt on Sunday. We went to Canada's Wonderland because it was Pass Holders Day, and yeah, I very rarely wear light colored tops. It's very true. I don't wear a lot of pastels because I'm usually like, I'm very jewel toned, and I have a lot of black in my wardrobe because that's the majority of a plus size wardrobe, frankly. But yeah, so we went to Wonderland and we walked around for the whole day, and I know that's when I was supposed to do the story stream. And we got home at like 6:30, and I was so badly burnt here, and I was exhausted, and I was like, there's no way I can stream tonight. And then Tuesday came, and I had fallen asleep and put an alarm, but I was so groggy and so headachy. Like, the pressure systems have been really weird. Like, it was like 20 degrees on Sunday, and today all day it's been like -1. So it's just, the pressure systems have been like all over the place. The temperature's been all over the place. You think the light color looks very complimentary on me? Thank you. Honestly, yeah, I think I had that thought as well, ALB, that like this is probably the first time since getting COVID that I've spent an entire day walking. Hello. Nice cup of decaf coffee. I bought myself some decaf coffee so that I can still have a coffee after dinner, because I was really missing having a coffee after dinner. Just a second, I have to go fix my... What is this music? This is elevator music, apparently. I'm gonna go back to chill music. But even that's a little weird. Why? Oh, that's nice. Let's do this. Okay, give me 2 seconds. I just have to fix my curtain. I have been muted this whole time. Try again. Hi, I'm back. Hi. Where did I even leave off? Yes. So today I was very productive. So I think there was kind of a 2-day recovery from Sunday's big out. Yes, thank you, Alistair. Bless. I figured it out. I looked down at the book. So tonight, this is what I was saying. Tonight we're going to be reading The Railway Children. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is one of the scariest covers because the children don't have eyes in the painting, or they do. They don't have pupils. That's a little weird, right? But anyways, the reason I chose this one is because on Friday's stream, when we were playing the murder mystery game, which was so much fun, and we're going to finish it this Friday during the 12-hour stream. I'll be posting the schedule tomorrow. But we got a little more than halfway through, so I figure we could finish the last half during the 12-hour stream. But one of the characters, when they're sort of being interviewed by Poirot, they said they were reading a book, and he asked them what was the book, and he said, well, I'm reading The Railroad Children. I know it's for kids, but it's a very good book. So I was like, well, I have that book, so let's read it. I've never read it. I think it's a very British story, because it's children who go from London to go live in the country during World War II, sort of like the kids in Narnia. And in Bedknobs and Broomsticks. So, let's switch over to our story. Which then, no, it's the wrong way. Sorry. That's pretty good, right? Let's turn off this bloody music, because I don't know what it's trying to do. I can't just find some chill music. I don't know why. So we have our cozy little sleeper car. I thought if it's going to be about railway children, then we should be on the rail. So yeah. I hope everyone else has been having a good week. Or at least higher energy than me. And I made it. You know what? I love rain sounds. Like, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but it's like one of my favorite most reaction. I am at the same energy. I was talking to another friend who said the same thing. They were like, I don't know what's going on this week, but I mean, I do think certainly the area that we're in, I think it's the pressure systems are not helping. Yeah, it's been a super low energy week, but I did get a lot done today. What did I do? I renewed my license plate sticker for 2 years. I booked 3 dentist appointments for myself and the kids, which I've been putting off for like a month or more, to the point where they had started emailing me and been like, hey, you're overdue. I submitted a claim to my insurance so that we could get the money back for it. What's the other thing that I did? Oh, I ordered my groceries. Yeah, I got a lot done this morning. And you know what I find is like the difficulty I have is like if I don't do something, if I oversleep and it's, you know, it sets my day off or whatever, then I lose motivation. But the minute I do like one thing, it's like a snowball of motivation, and it gets me going to like, okay, what can I do next? Okay, and I did like 3 loads of laundry today. So I just wish it was less like, I wish it was more predictable. But anyways, here's to the energy picking up and us having a better week. But for tonight, let's get cozy. All or nothing, I know. Tooth time. I didn't realize that I was overdue because I called for the kids and they were like, oh yeah, you're overdue too. And I was like, oh, okay. Okay, so is everybody cozy in your rail car, in our little rail car? And this over a little bit. Sound is good? Sounds pretty good. Okay. There's a dedication at the front of the book. So this is the Railway Children. It says, "To my dear son, Paul Bland, behind whose knowledge of railways my ignorance confidently shelters." How's the ambience? Is the sound, is it too quiet or is it okay? I just want gentle rain and railway sounds. Chapter 1: The Beginning of Things. They were not railway children to begin with. I don't suppose they had ever thought about railways except as a means of getting the masculine and cooks, the pantomime, zoological gardens, and Madame Tussauds. They were just ordinary suburban children, and they lived with their father and mother in an ordinary red brick-fronted villa, with colored glass in the front door, a tiled passage that was called a hall, a bathroom with hot and cold water, electric bells, French windows, and a good deal of white paint. In every modern convenience, as the house agents say. There were 3 of them. Roberta was the eldest, of course. Mothers never have favorites, but if their mother had had a favorite, it might have been Roberta. Next came Peter, who wished to be an engineer when he grew up, and the youngest was Phyllis, who meant extremely well. Mother did not spend all her time in paying dull calls to dull ladies and sitting dully at home waiting for dull ladies to pay calls to her. She was almost always there, ready to play with the children and read to them and help them to do their home lessons. Phyllis, that is a very... I used to read the Boxcar Kids when I was a kid. Is this... I don't know, actually. I don't actually know. I've heard of both. So... I don't know if one is inspired by the other. Maybe we can look it up after. She was almost always there, ready to play with the children and read to them and help them do their home lessons. Besides this, she used to write stories for them while they were at school and read them aloud after tea. And she always made up funny pieces of poetry for their birthdays and for other great occasions, such as the christening of the new kittens, or the refurnishing of the doll's house, or the time when they were getting over the mumps. These 3 lucky children always had everything they needed. Pretty clothes, good fires, a lovely nursery with heaps of toys, and a Mother Goose wallpaper. They had a kind and merry nursemaid and a dog who was called James and who was their very own. They also had a father who was just perfect. Never cross, never unjust, and always ready for a game. At least, if at any time he was not ready, he always had an excellent reason for it, and explained the reason to the children so interestingly and funnily that they felt sure he couldn't help himself. You will think that they ought to have been very happy, and so they were, but they did not know how happy till the pretty life in Edgecombe Villa was over and done with, and they had to live a very different life indeed. The dreadful change came quite suddenly. Peter had a birthday, his 10th. Among his other presents was a model engine, more perfect than you could ever have dreamed of. The other presents were full of charm, but the engine was fuller of charm than any of the others were. Its charm lasted in its full perfection for exactly 3 days. Then, owing either to Peter's inexperience or Phyllis's good intentions, which had been rather pressing, or to some other cause, the engine suddenly went off with a bang. James was so frightened that he went out and did not come back all day. All the Noah's Ark people who were in the tender were broken to bits, but nothing else was hurt except the poor little engine and the feelings of Peter. The others said he cried over it, but of course boys often do not cry, however terrible the tragedies may be which darken their lot. He said that his eyes were red because he had a cold. This turned out to be true, though Peter did not know it when he said it. The next day he had to go to bed and stay there. Mother began to be afraid that he might be sickening for measles, when suddenly he sat up in bed and said, "I hate gruel. I hate barley water. I hate bread and milk. I want to get up and have something real to eat." "What would you like?" Mother asked. "A pigeon pie," said Peter eagerly. "A large pigeon pie, a very large one." So Mother asked the cook to make a large pigeon pie. The pie was made, and when the pie was made, it was cooked, and when it was cooked, Peter ate some of it. After that, his cold was better. Mother made a piece of poetry to amuse him while the pie was being made. It began by saying what an unfortunate but worthy boy Peter was. Then it went on. He had an engine that he loved with all his heart and soul. And if he had a wish on earth, it was to keep it whole. One day, my friends, prepare your minds, I'm coming to the worst. Quite suddenly, a screw went mad, and then the boiler burst. With gloomy face, he picked it up and took it to his mother, though he could not suppose that she could make another. For those who perished on the line, he did not seem to care, his engine being more to him than all the people there. And now you see the reason why our Peter has been ill. He soothes his soul with pigeon pie, his gnawing grief to kill. He wraps himself in blankets warm and sleeps in bed till late, determined thus to overcome his miserable fate. And if his eyes are rather red, his cold must just excuse it. Offer him pie, you may be sure he never will refuse it. Father had been away in the country for 3 or 4 days. The Boxcar Children tells the story of 4 orphan children, Henry, Jessie, Violet, and Benny Alden. They create a home for themselves in an abandoned boxcar in the forest. That doesn't seem to be, according to the jacket, this tale, although it's a little close. So Mother simply asked the cook, right? What a time period to live in. Father had been away in the country for 3 or 4 days. All Peter's hopes for the curing of his afflicted engine were now fixed on his father, for Father was most wonderfully clever with his fingers. He could mend all sorts of things. He had often acted as a veterinarian surgeon to the wooden rocking horse. Once he had saved its life when all human aid was despaired of, and the poor creature was given up for lost. And even the carpenter said he didn't see his way to do anything, and it was Father who mended the doll's cradle when no one else could, and with a little glue and some bits of wood and a penknife made all the Noah's Ark beasts as strong on their pins as they ever were, if not stronger. Peter, with heroic unselfishness, did not say anything about his engine till after Father had had his dinner and his after-dinner cigar. The unselfishness was Mother's idea, but it was Peter who carried it out, and needed a good deal of patience, too. At last, Mother said to Father, "Now, dear, if you're quite rested and quite comfy, we want to tell you about the great railway accident and ask your advice." "All right," said Father. "Fire away." So then Peter told the sad tale and fetched what was left of the engine. Said Father, when he had looked the engine over very carefully. The children held their breaths. "Is there no hope?" said Peter in a low, unsteady voice. "Hope? Rather. Tons of it," said Father cheerfully. "But it'll want something besides hope. A bit of brazing, say, or some solder, or a new valve. I think we'd better keep it for a rainy day. In other words, I'll give up a Saturday afternoon to it, and you shall all help me." "Can girls help mend engines?" Peter asked doubtfully. "Of course they can. Girls are just as clever as boys, and don't you forget it. How would you like to be an engine driver, Phil?" "My face would always be dirty, wouldn't it?" said Phyllis in an unemotional tones. "And I expect I should break something." "I should just love it," said Roberta. "Do you think I could when I'm grown up, Daddy? Or even a stoker?" "You mean a fireman," said Daddy, pulling and twisting at the engine. "Well, if you still wish it, when you're grown up, we'll see about making you a firewoman. I remember when I was a boy." Just then, there was a knock at the front door. "What on earth?" said Father. "An Englishman's house is his castle, of course, but I do wish they built semi-detached villas with moats and drawbridges." Ruth, she was the parlour maid. The parlour maid. Why is that one? They're all British. What are you talking about? The youngest is always the most British. Ruth, she was the parlour maid and had red hair, came in and said that 2 gentlemen wanted to see the master. "I've shown them to the library, sir." The maid always has like a Scouser accent, right? "But I'm the youngest." "Yes, and you are the most British, I told you." I expect it's a subscription to the Vicar's testimonial," said Mother. Or else it's the choir holiday fund. Get rid of them quickly, dear. It does break up an evening so, and it's nearly the children's bedtime. But Father did not seem able to get rid of the gentleman at all quickly. I wish we had got a moat and drawbridge, said Roberta. Then, when we didn't want people, we could just pull up the drawbridge and no one else can get in. I expect Father will have forgotten about when he was a boy if they stay much longer. Mother tried to make the time pass by telling them a new fairy story about a princess with green eyes, but it was difficult because they could hear the voices of Father and the gentleman in the library, and Father's voice sounded louder and different from the voices he generally used to people who came about testimonials and holiday funds. Then the library bell rang, and everyone heaved a breath of relief. They so clearly prefer their dad to their mom. They're going now, said Phyllis. He's rung to have them shown out. But instead of showing anybody out, Ruth showed herself in, and she looked queer, the children thought. Please, she said. The master wants to see you. Just step into the study. He looks like the dead man, Mum. I think he's had bad news. You'd best prepare yourself for the worst, man. Perhaps it's a death in the family or a bank busted or... That'll do, Ruth, said Mother gently. You can go. Then Mother went into the library. There was more talking. Then the bell rang again, and Ruth fetched a cab. The children heard boots go down and out the steps. The cab drove away, and the front door shut. Then Mother came in. Her dear face was as white as her lace collar, and her eyes looked very big and shining. Her mouth looked just like a line of pale red, and her lips were thin, and not their proper shape at all. It's bedtime, she said. Ruth will put you to bed. But you promised we should sit up late tonight because Father's coming home, said Phyllis. Father's been called away on business, said Mother. Come, darlings, go at once. They kissed her and went. Roberta lingered to give Mother an extra hug and to whisper, It wasn't bad news, Mummy, was it? Is anyone dead? Oh, nobody's dead, no, said Mother. And she almost seemed to push Roberta away. I can't tell you anything tonight, my pet. Go, dear. Go now. So Roberta went. Ruth brushed the girls' hair and helped them to undress. Mother almost always did this herself. You kids gotta go. Oh, my goodness. When she had turned down the gas and left them, she found Peter still dressed, waiting on the stairs. I say, Ruth, what's up? He asked. Don't ask me no questions and I won't tell you no lies, the red-headed Ruth replied. You'll know soon enough. Late that night, Mother came up and kissed all three children as they lay asleep, but Roberta was the only one whom the kiss woke, and she lay mousy still and said nothing. If Mother doesn't want us to know she's been crying, she said to herself as she heard through the dark the catching of her mother's breath, we won't know it. That's all. When they came down to breakfast the next morning, Mother had already gone out. To London, Ruth said, and left them to their breakfast. There's something awful the matter, said Peter, breaking his egg. Ruth told me last night we should know soon enough. Did you ask her? Said Roberta with scorn. Yes, I did, said Peter angrily. If you could go to bed without caring whether Mother was worried or not, I couldn't, so there. I don't think we ought to ask the servants things Mother doesn't tell us, said Roberta. That's right, Miss Goody-Goody, said Peter. Preach away. I'm not Goody, said Phyllis, but I think Bobby's right this time. Of course, she's always right in her own opinion, said Peter. Oh, don't, cried Roberta, putting down her egg spoon. Don't let's be horrid to each other. I'm sure some dire calamity is happening. Don't let's make it worse. Who began, I should like to know, said Peter. Roberta made an effort and answered. I did, I suppose, but... Well, then, said Peter triumphantly. But before he went to school, he thumped his sister between the shoulders and told her to cheer up. The children came home to 1 o'clock dinner, but Mother was not there, and she was not there at tea time. Don't let's be horrid. I know, I love it. It was nearly 7 before she came in, looking so ill and tired that the children felt they could not ask her any questions. She sank into an armchair. Phyllis took the long pins out of her hat, while Roberta took off her gloves, and Peter unfastened her walking shoes and fetched her soft, velvety slippers for her. When she had a cup of tea and Roberta had put eau de cologne on her poor head that ached, Mother said, "Now, my darlings, I want to tell you something. Those men last night did bring very bad news, and Father will be away for some time. I am very worried about it, and I want you all to help me, and not make things harder for me." "As if we would," said Roberta, holding Mother's hand against her face. "You can help me very much," said Mother, "by being good and happy and not quarreling when I'm away." Roberta and Peter exchanged guilty glances, "for I shall have to be away a good deal." "We won't quarrel, indeed we won't," said everybody, and meant it too. "Then," Mother went on, "I want you not to ask me any questions about this trouble, and not to ask anybody else any questions." Peter cringed and shuffled his boots on the carpet. "You'll promise this too, won't you?" said Mother. "I did ask Ruth," said Peter suddenly. "I'm very sorry, but I did." "And what did she say?" "She said I should know soon enough." "It isn't necessary for you to know anything about it," said Mother. "It's about business, and you never do understand business, do you?" "No," said Roberta. "Is it something to do with the government? For Father was in a government office." "Yes," said Mother. "Now, it's bedtime, my darlings, and don't you worry. It'll all come right in the end." "Then don't you worry either, Mother," said Phyllis, "and we'll all be as good as gold." Mother sighed and kissed them. "We'll begin being good the first thing tomorrow morning," said Peter, as they went upstairs. "Why not now?" said Roberta. "There's nothing to be good about now, silly," said Peter. "We might begin to try to feel good," said Phyllis, "and not call names." "Who's calling names?" said Peter. "Bobby knows right enough when I say silly. It's just the same as if I said Bobby." "Well," said Roberta. "No, I don't mean what you mean. I mean it's just, what is it Father calls it? A germ of endearment. Good night." The girls folded up their clothes with more than usual neatness, which was the only way of being good that they could think of. "I say," said Phyllis, smoothing out her pinafore, "you used to say it was so dull. Nothing happened, like in the books. Now something has happened." "I never wanted things to happen to make Mother unhappy," said Roberta. "Everything's perfectly horrid." Everything continued to be perfectly horrid for some weeks. Nothing can go wrong by keeping everything a secret from our children. So when my mother was very little, her father, my grandfather, went to jail. And I can't remember if he went for 6 or 9 months. I think it was 9 months. And, she was the oldest, and no one would tell them where he was and what happened, and they weren't allowed to ask about it or talk about it. It's a very British thing, I suppose, or I don't know. I suppose maybe it's just a very unspeakable thing back at the time. Mother was nearly always out. Meals were dull and dirty. The between maid was sent away, and Aunt Emma came on a visit. Aunt Emma was much older than Mother. She was going abroad to be a governess. She was very busy getting her clothes ready, and they were very, very ugly, dingy clothes, and she had them always littering about, and the sewing machine seemed to whir on all day and most of the night. Aunt Emma believed in keeping children in their proper places, and they more than returned the compliment. Their idea of Aunt Emma's proper place was anywhere where they were not. So they saw very little of her. They preferred the company of the servants, who were more amusing. Cook, if in a good temper, could sing comic songs, and the housemaid, if she happened not to be offended with you, could imitate a hen that has laid an egg, a bottle of champagne being opened, and could mew like 2 cats fighting. The servants never told the children what the bad news was that the gentleman had brought to Father, but they kept hinting that they could tell a great deal if they chose, and this was not comfortable. One day, when Peter had made a booby trap over the bathroom door, and it had acted beautifully as Ruth passed through, that red-haired parlour-maid caught him and boxed his ears. "You'll come to a bad end," she said furiously. "You nasty little limb, you. If you don't mend your ways, you'll go where your precious father's gone, so I'll tell you straight." Roberta repeated this to her mother, and the next day Ruth was sent away. Then came the time when Mother came home and went to bed and stayed there 2 days, and the doctor came, and the children crept wretchedly about the house and wondered if the world was coming to an end. Mother came down one morning to breakfast very pale and with lines on her face that used to not be there, and she smiled as well as she could and said, "Yep, they sent her away." "Now, my pets, everything is settled. We're going to leave this house and go live in the country. Such a ducky dear little white house, I know you'll love it." A whirling week of packing followed, not just packing clothes like when you go to the seaside, but packing chairs and tables, covering their tops with sacking and their legs with straw. All sorts of things were packed that you don't pack when you go to the seaside. Crockery, blankets, candlesticks, carpets, bedsteads, saucepans, and even fenders and fire irons. The house was like a furniture warehouse. I think the children enjoyed it very much. Mother was very busy, but not too busy now and then to talk to them, and read to them, and even to make a bit of poetry for Phyllis to cheer her up when she fell down with a screwdriver and ran it into her hand. "Ugh. Aren't you going to pack this, Mother?" Roberta asked, pointing to the beautiful cabinet inlaid with red turtle shell and brass. "We can't take everything," said Mother. "But we seem to be taking all the ugly things," said Roberta. "We're taking the useful ones," said Mother. "We've got to play at being poor for a bit, my chickabiddy." We've got to play at being... This is getting curiouser and curiouser. These kids might suck, I'm still deciding. When all the ugly and useful things had been packed up and taken away in a van by men in green baize aprons, the 2 girls and Mother and Aunt Emma slept in the 2 spare rooms where the furniture was all pretty. All their beds had gone. A bed was made up for Peter on the drawing-room sofa. "I say, this locks," he said, wriggling joyously as Mother tucked him up. "I do like moving. I wish we moved once a month." Mother laughed. "I don't," she said. "Good night, Peterkin." And she turned away. As she turned away, Roberta saw her face. She never forgot it. "Oh, Mother," she whispered all to herself as she got into bed. "How brave you are. How I love you. Fancy being brave enough to laugh when you're feeling like that." Next day, boxes were filled, and boxes and more boxes, and then late in the afternoon, a cab came to take them to the station. Aunt Emma saw them off. They felt that they were seeing her off, and they were glad of it. "Oh, but those poor little foreign children that she's going to governess," whispered Phyllis. "I wouldn't be them for anything." At first they enjoyed looking out of the windows, but when it grew dusk they grew sleepier and sleepier, and no one knew how long they had been in the train when they were roused by Mother shaking them gently and saying, "Wake up, dears, we're there." They woke up cold and melancholy and stood shivering on the draughty platform while the baggage was taking out of the train. Then the engine, puffing and blowing, set to work again and dragged the train away. The children watched the tail lights of the guard's van disappear into the darkness. This was the first train the children saw on that railway, which was in time to become so very dear to them. They did not guess at how they would grow to love the railway, and how soon it would become the center of their new life, nor what wonders and changes it would bring to them. They only shivered and sneezed and hoped the walk to the new house would not be long. Peter's nose was colder than he ever remembered it to have been before. Roberta's hat was crooked, and the elastic seemed tighter than usual, and Phyllis's shoelaces had come undone. "Come," said Mother. "We've got to walk. There aren't any cabs here." The walk was dark and muddy. The children stumbled a little on the rough road, and once Phyllis absently fell into a puddle and was picked up damp and unhappy. There were no gas lamps on the road, and the road was uphill. The cart went at a slow pace, and they followed the gritty crunch of its wheels. As their eyes got used to the darkness, they could see the mound of boxes swaying dimly in front of them. A long gate had to be opened for the cart to pass through, and after that the road seemed to go across fields, and now it went downhill. Presently a great dark lumpish thing showed over to the right. There's the house, said Mother. I wonder why she shut the shutters. Who's she? Asked Roberta. The woman I engaged to clean the place and put the furniture straight up and get supper. There was a low wall and trees inside. That's the garden, said Mother. It looks more like a dripping pan full of black cabbages, says Peter. The cart went on along by the garden wall and round to the back of the house, and here it clattered into a cobblestone yard and stopped at the back door. There was no light in any of the windows. Everyone hammered at the door, but no one came. The man who drove the cart said he expected Mrs. Vinny had gone home. You see, your train was late, said he. But she's got the key, said Mother. What are we to do? Oh, she'll have left that under the doorstep, said the cartman. Folks do hereabouts. He took the lantern off his cart and stooped. Aye, here it is, right enough, he said. He unlocked the door and went in and set his lantern on the table. Got here a candle, said he. I don't know where anything is. Mother spoke rather less cheerfully than usual. He struck a match. There was a candle on the table, and he lighted it. By its thin little glimmer, the children saw a large bare kitchen with a stone floor. There were no curtains, no hearth rug. The kitchen table from home stood in the middle of the room. The chairs were in one corner, and the pots, pans, brooms, and crockery in another. There was no fire, and the black grate showed cold, dead ashes. As the cartman turned to go out after he had brought in the boxes, there was a rustling, scampering sound that seemed to come from inside the walls of the house. Oh, what's that? Cried the girls. It's only the rats, said the cartman, and he went away and shut the door, and the sudden draught of it blew out the candle. Oh, dear, said Phyllis. I wish we hadn't come. And she knocked a chair over. Only the rats, said Peter, in the dark. I'm having trouble feeling bad for them. Chapter 2. Peter's Coal Mine. What fun, said Mother in the dark, feeling for the matches on the table. How frightened the poor mice were. I don't believe there were rats at all. She struck her match and relit the candle, and everyone looked at each other by its winky-blinky light. Well, she said, we've often wanted something to happen, and now it has. This is quite an adventure, isn't it? I told Mrs. Vinny to get us some bread and butter and meat and things, and to have supper ready. I suppose she's laid it in the dining room. Let's go and see. The dining room opened out of the kitchen. It looked much darker than the kitchen when they went in with the one candle, because the kitchen was whitewashed, but the dining room was dark wood from floor to ceiling, and across the ceiling there were heavy black beams. There was a muddle maze of dusty furniture, the breakfast room furniture from the old home where they had lived all their lives. It seemed a very long time ago, and a very long way off. There was a table, certainly, and there were chairs, but there was no supper. Let's look in the other rooms, said Mother, and they looked, and in each room was the same kind of blundering half-arrangement of furniture and fire-irons and crockery and all sorts of odd things on the floor, but there was nothing to eat. Even in the pantry there was only a rusty cake tin and a broken plate with whitening mixed in it. What a horrid old woman, said Mother. She just walked off with the money and not got us anything to eat at all. Then shan't we have any supper at all? Asked Phyllis, dismayed, stepping back onto the soap dish that cracked responsively. Oh, yes, said Mother, only it'll mean unpacking one of those big cases that we put in the cellar. Phil, do mind where you're walking to. There's a dear. Peter, hold the light. The cellar door opened out of the kitchen. There were 5 wooden steps leading down. It wasn't a proper cellar at all, the children thought, because its ceiling went up as high as the kitchen's. A bacon rack hung under its ceiling. There was wood in it and coal, and also the big cases. Peter held the candle all on one side while Mother tried to open the great packing case. It was very securely nailed down. Where's the hammer? Asked Peter. That's just it, said Mother. I'm afraid it's inside the box. But there's a coal shovel, and there's the kitchen poker. And with these she tried to get the case open. Let me do it, said Peter, thinking he could do it better himself. Everyone thinks this when he sees another person stirring a fire, or opening a box, or untying a knot in a bit of string. You'll hurt your hands, Mummy, said Roberta. Let me. I wish Father was here, said Phyllis. He'd get it open in 2 shakes. What are you kicking me for, Bobby? I wasn't, said Roberta. Just then the first of the long nails in the packing case began to come out with a scrunch. Then a lathe was raised, and then another, till all four stood up with the long nails in them shining fiercely like iron teeth in the candlelight. "Hooray!" said Mother. "Here are some candles. Very first thing. You girls go and light them. You'll find some saucers and things. Just drop a little candle grease in the saucer and stick the candle upright in it." "How many shall we light?" "As many as ever you like," said Mother gaily. "The great thing is to be cheerful. Nobody can be cheerful in the dark except owls and dormice." So the girls lighted the candles. The head of the first match flew off and stuck to Phyllis's finger, but, as Roberta said, it was only a little burn, and she might have had to be a Roman martyr to be burned whole if she had happened to live in the days when those things were fashionable. Then, when the dining room was lighted by 14 candles, Roberta fetched coal and wood and lighted a fire. "It's very cold for May," she said, feeling what a grown-up thing it was to say. The firelight and the candlelight made the dining room look very different, for now you could see that the dark walls were of wood, carved here and there into little wreaths and loops. "No, Phyllis, we shan't." The girls hastily tidied the room, which meant putting the chairs against the wall and piling all the odds and ends into a corner, and partly hiding them with the big leather armchair that Father used to sit in after dinner. "Bravo!" cried Mother, coming in with a tray full of things. "This is something like. I'll just get a tablecloth and then—" The tablecloth was in a box with a proper lock that was opened with a key and not with a shovel, and when the cloths were spread on the table, a real face was laid out on it. Everyone was very, very tired, but everyone cheered up at the sight of the funny and delightful supper. There were biscuits, the Marie and the plain kind, sardines, preserved ginger, cooking raisins, and candied peel and marmalade. "What a good thing Aunt Emma packed up all the odds and ends out of the store cupboard," said Mother. "Now, Phil, don't put the marmalade spoon in among the sardines." "No, I won't, Mother," said Phyllis, and put it down among the Marie biscuits. "Let's drink Aunt Emma's health," said Roberta suddenly. "What would we have done if she hadn't packed up these things? Here's to Aunt Emma." And the toast was drunk in ginger wine and water out of the willet-patterned teacups, because the glasses couldn't be found. They all felt that they had been a little hard on Aunt Emma. She wasn't a nice, cuddly person like Mother, but after all, it was she who had thought of packing up the odds and ends of things to eat. It was Aunt Emma, too, who had aired all the sheets ready, and the men who had moved the furniture had put the bedsteads together, so the beds were soon made. "Good night, chickies," said Mother. "I'm sure there aren't any rats, but I'll leave my door open, and then if a mouse comes, you need only scream, and I'll come and tell it exactly what I think of it." Then she went to her own room. Roberta woke to hear the little traveling clock chime 2. It sounded like a church clock ever so far away, she always thought, and she heard, too, Mother still moving about in her room. Next morning, Roberta woke Phyllis by pulling her hair gently, but quite enough for her purpose. "What's the matter?" asked Phyllis, still almost wholly asleep. Wake up," said Roberta. "We're in the new house, don't you remember? No servants or anything. Let's get up and begin to be useful. We'll just creep down most quietly and have everything beautiful before Mother gets up. I've woken Peter. He'll be dressed as soon as we are." So they dressed quietly and quickly. Of course, there was no water in their room. So when they got down, they washed as much as they thought was necessary under the spout of the pump in the yard. One pumped and the other washed. It was splashy, but interesting. "It's much more fun than basin washing," said Roberta. "How sparkly the weeds are between the stones, and the moss on the roof. Oh, and the flowers!" The roof of the back kitchen sloped down quite low. It was made of thatch, and it had moss on it, and house leeks, and stonecrop and wallflowers, and even a clump of purple flag flowers at the far corner. "This is far, far and away prettier than Edgecombe Villa," said Phyllis. "I wonder what the garden's like." "We mustn't think of the garden yet," said Roberta with earnest energy. "Let's go in and begin to work." They lighted the fire and put the kettle on, and they arranged the crockery for breakfast. They could not find all the right things, but a glass ashtray made an excellent salt cellar, and a newish baking tin seemed as if it would do to put bread on if they had any. When there seemed to be nothing more that they could do, they went out again to the fresh, bright morning. "We'll go into the garden now," said Peter, but somehow they couldn't find the garden. They went round and round the house. The yard occupied the back, and across it were stables and outbuildings. On the other 3 sides, the house stood simply in a field, without a yard of garden to divide it from the short, smooth turf. And yet they had certainly seen the garden wall the night before. It was a hilly country. Down below they could see the line of the railway and the black yawning mouth of a tunnel. The station was out of sight. There was a great bridge with tall arches running across one end of the valley. "Never mind the garden," said Peter. "Let's go down and look at the railway. There might be trains passing." "We can see them from here," said Roberta slowly. "Let's sit down a bit." So they all sat down on a great flat grey stone that had pushed itself up out of the grass, and it was one of the many that lay about on the hillside, and when Mother came out to look for them at 8 o'clock, she found them deeply asleep in a contented sun-warmed bunch. I need to cough. This house sounds awesome. I know it does, doesn't it? Yeah, they haven't said exactly, but yeah, there's been hints that he was taken off to jail, potentially. Yeah. They had made an excellent fire and had set the kettle on it about 5:30, so that by 8 the fire had been out for some time. The water had all boiled away, and the bottom was burnt out of the kettle. Also, they had not thought of washing the crockery before they set the table. "But it doesn't matter, the cups and saucers, I mean," said Mother, "because I found another room. I'd quite forgotten there was one, and it's magic. And I've boiled the water for tea in a saucepan." The forgotten room opened out of the kitchen. In the agitation and half-darkness the night before, its door had been mistaken for a cupboard's. It was a little square room, and on its table, all nicely set out, was a joint of cold roast beef with bread and butter, cheese, and pie. "Pie for breakfast!" cried Peter. "How perfectly ripping!" I'm sorry. I love I love old British lingo. How perfectly ripping. Imagine just finding another room and it's full of food. Perfectly ripping. "It isn't pigeon pie," said Mother. "It's only apple. Well, this is the supper we ought to have had last night. And there was a note from Mrs. Vinny. Her son-in-law has broken his arm and she has to get home early. She's coming this morning at 10. That was a wonderful breakfast. It is unusual to begin the day with cold apple pie, but the children all said they would rather have it than meat. "You see, it's more like dinner than breakfast to us," said Peter, passing his plate for more, "because we were up so early." The day passed in helping Mother to unpack and arrange things. 6 small legs quite ached with running about while their owners carried clothes and crockery and all sorts of things to their proper places. It was not till quite late in the afternoon that Mother said, "There, that'll do for today. I'll lie down for an hour, so as to be fresh as a lark by supper time." Then they all looked at each other. Each of the 3 expressive countenances expressed the same thought. That thought was doable and consisted, like the bits of information in the Child's Guide to Knowledge, of a question and an answer. Question: where shall we go? Answer: to the railway. So to the railway they went, and as soon as they started for the railway, they saw where the garden had hidden itself. It was right behind the stables, and it had a high wall all round. "Oh, never mind about the garden now," cried Peter. "Mother told me this morning where it was. It'll keep till tomorrow. Let's go to the railway." The way to the railway was all downhill over smooth short turf with here and there furze bushes and grey and yellow rocks sticking out like candied peel from the top of a cake. The way ended in a steep run and a wooden fence, and there was the railway with the shining metals and the telegraph wires and posts and signals. They all climbed to the top of the fence, and then suddenly there was a rumbling sound that made them look along the line to the right, where the dark mouth of a tunnel opened itself in the face of a rocky cliff. Next moment, a train had rushed out of the tunnel with a shriek and a snort and had slid noisily past them. They felt the rush of its passing, and the pebbles on the line jumped and rattled under it as it went by. "Oh," said Roberta, drawing a long breath. "It was like a great dragon tearing by. Did you feel it fan us with its hot wings?" "I suppose a dragon's lair might look very like that tunnel from the outside," said Phyllis. But Peter said, "I never thought we should ever get so near to a train as this. It's the most ripping sport." "Better than toy engines, isn't it?" said Roberta. I am tired of calling Roberta by her name. I don't see why I should. No one else did. Everyone else called her Bobby, and I don't see why I shouldn't. "I don't know. It's different," said Peter. "It seems so odd to see all of a train. It's awfully tall, isn't it?" "We've always seen them cut in half by platforms," said Phyllis. "I wonder if that train was going to London," said Bobby said. "London's where Father is." "Let's go down to the station and find out," said Peter. So they went.
They walked along the edge of the line and heard the telegraph wires humming over their heads. When you were in the train, it seemed such a little way between post and post, and one after another the posts seemed to catch up the wires almost more quickly than you can count them. But when you have to walk, the posts seem few and far between. But the children got to the station at last. Never before had any one of them been at a station, except for the purpose of catching trains, or perhaps waiting for them, and always with grown-ups in attendance, grown-ups who were not themselves interested in stations, except as places from which they wished to get away. Finish my coffee? I did. Never before had they passed close enough to a signal box to be able to notice the wires and to hear the mysterious ping, ping, followed by the strong, firm clicking of machinery. The very sleepers on which the rails lay were a delightful path to travel by, just far enough apart to serve as the stepping stones in a game of foaming torrents hastily organized by Bobby. I apologize if I cough a little bit more. I choked on a vitamin yesterday, quite badly, and it kicked my cough up all over again. So I have to cough a little bit more than I was. Then, to arrive at the station, not through the booking office, but in a freebooting sort of way by the sloping end of the platform, this in itself was a joy. Joy, too, was to peep into the porter's room, where the lamps are, and the railway almanac on the wall, and one porter half asleep behind a paper. There were a great many crossing lines at the station. Some of them just ran into a yard and stopped short, as though they were tired of business and meant to retire for good. Trucks stood on the rails here, and on one side was a great heap of coal. Not a loose heap, such as you see in your coal cellar, but a sort of solid building of coals with large square blocks of coal outside, used just as though they were bricks, and built up till the heap looked like the picture of the cities of the plain in Bible stories for infants. Molly, what are you doing? What are you doing, baby? Come here. She's wandering around my feet, and I don't know why. Here, baby. Coming up? Nope. She's content. There was a line of whitewash near the top of the coaly wall. When presently the porter lounged out of his room at the twice-repeating tingling thrill of a gong over the station door, Peter said, "How do you do?" in his best manner, and hastened to ask what the white mark was on the coal for. "Mark how much coal there be," said the porter, "so we'll know if anyone nicks it. So don't you go off with none in your pockets, young gentleman." This seemed at the time but a merry jest, and Peter felt at once that the porter was a friendly sort with no nonsense about him, but later the words came back to Peter with a new meaning. Have you ever gone into a farmhouse kitchen on a baking day and seen the great crock of dough set by the fire to rise? If you have, and if you were at that time still young enough to be interested in everything you saw, you will remember that you found yourself quite unable to resist the temptation to poke your finger into the soft round dough that curved inside the pan like a giant mushroom. And you will remember that your finger made a dent in the dough, and that slowly, but quite surely, the dent disappeared, and the dough looked quite the same as it did before you touched it. Unless, of course, your hand was extra dirty, in which case, naturally, there would be a little black mark. Well, it was just like that with the sorrow the children had felt at Father's going away, and at Mother's being so unhappy. It made a deep impression, but the impression did not last long. They soon got used to being without Father, though they did not forget him, and they got used to not going to school, and to seeing very little of Mother, who was now almost all day shut up in her upstairs room, writing. She used to come down at tea time and read aloud the stories she had written. They were lovely stories. The rocks and hills and valleys and trees, the canal, and above all the railway were so new and so perfectly pleasing that the remembrance of the old life in the villa grew to seem almost like a dream. Mother had told them more than once that they were quite poor now, but this did not seem to be anything but a way of speaking. Grown-up people, even mothers, often make remarks that don't seem to mean anything in particular, just for the sake of saying something. Seemingly. There was always enough to eat, and they wore the same kind of nice clothes they had always worn. But in June came 3 wet days. The rain came down straight as lances. It was very, very cold. Nobody could go out, and everybody shivered. They all went up to the door of Mother's room and knocked. "Well, what is it?" asked Mother from inside. "Mother," said Bobby, "mayn't I light a fire? I do know how." And Mother said, "No, my ducky love, we mustn't have fires in June. Coal is so dear. If you're cold, go and have a good romp in the attic. That'll warm you." "But, Mother, it only takes such a very little coal to make a fire." "It's more than we can afford, chicken love," said Mother cheerfully. "Now run away there, darlings. I'm madly busy." "Mother's always busy now," said Phyllis in a whisper to Peter. Peter did not answer. He shrugged his shoulders. He was thinking. Thought, however, could not long keep itself from the suitable furnishings of a bandit's lair in the attic. Peter was the bandit, of course. Bobby was his lieutenant. His band of trusty robbers, and, in due course, the parents of Phyllis, who was the captured maiden for whom a magnificent ransom in horse beans was unhesitatingly paid. They all went down to tea, flushed and joyous as any mountain brigands, but when Phyllis was going to add jam to her bread and butter, Mother said, "Jam or butter, dear, not jam and butter. We can't afford that sort of reckless luxury nowadays." Phyllis finished the slice of bread and butter in silence, and followed it up by bread and jam. Peter mingled thought and weak tea. After tea, they went back to the attic, and he said to his sisters, "I have an idea." "What's that?" they asked politely. "I shan't tell you," said Peter's unexpected rejoinder. "Oh, very well," said Bobby, and Phil said, "Don't then." "Girls," said Peter, "are always so hasty-tempered." "I should like to know what boys are," said Bobby, with fine disdain. "I don't want to know about your silly ideas." "You'll know some day," said Peter, keeping his own temper by what looked exactly like a miracle. "If you hadn't been so keen on a row, I might have told you about it being only noble-heartedness that made me not tell you my idea, but now I shan't tell you anything at all about it, so there." And it was indeed some time before he could be induced to say anything, and when he did, it wasn't much. He said, "The only reason I won't tell you my idea is that I'm going to do it is because it may be wrong, and I don't want to drag you into it." "Don't you do it if it's wrong, Bobby." "Peter," said Bobby, "let me do it." But Phyllis said, "I should like to do wrong if you're going to." "No," said Peter, rather touched by this devotion. "It is a forlorn hope, and I'm going to lead it. All I ask is that if Mother asks where I am, you won't blab." "I haven't got anything to blab," said Bobby indignantly. "Oh, yes, you have," said Peter, dropping horse beans through his fingers. "I've trusted you to the death. You know I'm going to do a lone adventure, and some people might think it wrong. I don't. And if Mother asks where I am, say I'm playing at mines." "What sort of mines?" "You just say mines." "You might tell us, Pete." "Well then, coal mines. But don't you let the word pass your lips of pain or torture." "You needn't threaten," said Bobby, "and I do think you might let us help." "If I find a coal mine, you shall help can the coal," Peter condescended to promise. "Keep your secret if you like," said Phyllis. "Keep it if you can," said Bobby. "I'll keep it right enough," said Peter. Between tea and supper there is an interval, even in the most greedily regulated families. At this time Mother was usually writing, and Mrs. Vinnie had gone home. 2 nights after the dawning of Peter's idea, he beckoned the girls mysteriously at the twilight hour. "Come hither with me," he said, "and bring the Roman chariot." The Roman chariot was a very old perambulator that had spent years of retirement in the loft, over the coach-house. The children had oiled its works till it gilded noiseless as a pneumatic bicycle, and answered to the helm, as it had probably done long ago in its best days. "Follow your dauntless leader," said Peter, and led the way down the hill towards the station. Just above the station, many rocks had pushed their heads out through the turf as though they, like the children, were interested in the railway. In a little hollow between 3 rocks lay a heap of dried brambles and heather. Peter halted, turned over the brushwood with a well-scarred boot, and said, "Here is the first coal from St. Peter's mine. We'll take it home in the chariot. Punctuality and dispatch. All orders carefully attended to. Any shaped lump cut to suit rather regular customers." The chariot was packed full of coal, and when it was packed, it had to be unpacked again, because it was so heavy that it couldn't be got up the hill by the 3 children, not even when Peter harnessed himself to the handle with his braces, and firmly grasping his waistband in one hand, pulled while the girls pushed behind. 3 journeys had to be made before the coal from Peter's mine was added to the heap of Mother's coal in the cellar. Afterwards, Peter went out alone and came back very black and mysterious. "I've been to my coal mine," he said. "Tomorrow evening we'll bring home the black diamonds in the chariot." It was a week later that Mrs. Vinny remarked to Mother how well this last lot of coal was holding out. Oh, treat for Molly. Sorry, I just saw that. Hi, baby. She's laying on the carpet under the chair. I don't know why she's not on the chair. Hi, you coming for a treat? Here you go. Oh dear. You're not able to get up on your chair. Come here, baby. No wonder she's on the carpet. Here, coming up? Here. Molly says, "Thank you, ALB. Thank you for spending your bubbles on treats for Molly." Yeah, these kids are straight up stealing. There's no Bible stories for infants trademark. I used to have a comic book Bible, and I actually loved it, like, because it was like Old Testament, and it was all done up like the 70s, 60s, and 70s comic books. It was great. Here you go, baby. All right. It was a week later that Mrs. Finney remarked to Mother how well this last lot of coal was holding out. The children hugged themselves and each other in complicated wriggles of silent laughter as they listened on the stairs. They had all forgotten by now that there had ever been any doubt in Peter's mind as to whether coal mining was wrong. But there came a dreadful night when the station master put on a pair of old sand shoes that he had worn at the seaside on his summer holiday and crept out very quietly to the yard where the Sodom and Gomorrah heap of coal was, with the whitewashed line round it. He crept out there, and he waited like a cat by a mouse hole. On the top of the heap, something small and dark was scrabbling and rattling furtively among the coal. The station master concealed himself in the shadow of a brake van that had a little tin chimney and was labeled GN and SR 34576. Return at once to White Heathen Sidings. And in this concealment he lurked till the small thing on the top of the heap ceased to scrabble and rattle, came to the edge of the heap, cautiously let itself down, and lifted something after it. Then the arm of the station master was raised, the hand of the station master fell on a collar, and there was Peter, firmly held by the jacket with an old carpenter's bag full of coal in his trembling clutch. "So I've caught you at last, haven't I, you young thief?" said the station master. "I'm not a thief," said Peter as firmly as he could. "I'm a coal miner." "Tell that to the Marines," said the station master. "It would be just as true to whoever I told it to," said Peter. "You're right there," said the man who held him. "Stow your jaw, you young grit, and come along to the station." "Oh, no," cried in the darkness an agonized voice that was not Peter's. "Not the police station," said another voice from the darkness. "Not yet," said the station master. "The railway station first. Why, it's a regular gang. Any more of you?" "Only us," said Bobby and Phyllis, coming out of the shadow of another truck labelled Staveley Colliery and bearing on it the legend in white chalk, "Wanted in number 1 road." "What do you mean by spying on a fellow like this?" said Peter angrily. "Time someone did spy on you, I think," said the station master. "Come along to the station." "Oh, don't," said Bobby. "Can't you decide now what you'll do to us? It's our fault just as much as Peter's. We helped carry the coal away, and we knew where he got it." "No, you didn't," said Peter. Yes, we did, said Bobby. We knew all the time. We only pretended we didn't just to humour you. Peter's cup was full. He had mined for coal. He had struck coal. He had been caught. And now he learned that his sisters had humoured him. Don't hold me, he said. I won't run away. The station master loosed Peter's collar, struck a match, and looked at them by its flickering light. Why, he said, you're the children from the 3 chimneys up yonder. So nice dressed, too. Tell me now, what made you do such a thing? Haven't you ever been to church or learned your catechisms or anything? Not to know it's wicked to steal? He spoke much more gently now, and Peter said, I didn't think it was stealing. I was almost sure it wasn't. I thought if I took it from the outside pan of the heap, perhaps it would be, but in the middle I thought I could fairly count it in only mining. It'll take thousands of years for you to burn up all that coal and get to the middle parts. Not quite, but did you do it for a lark or what? Not much lark carrying that beastly heavy stuff up the hill, said Peter indignantly. Then why did you? The station master's voice was so much kinder now that Peter replied, You know that wet day? Well, Mother said we were too poor to have a fire. We always had fires when it was cold at our other house, and... Don't, interrupted Bobby in a whisper. Well, said the station master, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll look over it this once, but you remember, young gentleman, stealing is stealing, and what's mine isn't yours, whether you call it mining or whether you don't. Run along home. Do you mean you aren't going to do anything to us? Well, you are a brick, said Peter with enthusiasm. I don't think that would be taken as a compliment today. You are a brick. You're a dear, said Bobby. You're a darling, said Phyllis. That's all right, said the station master, and on this they parted. Don't speak to me, said Peter as the 3 went up the hill. You're spies and traitors, that's what you are. But the girls were too glad to have Peter between them, safe and free, and on the way to 3 Chimneys and not to the police station, which, to mind much what he said. We did say it was us as much as you, said Bobby gently. Well, and it wasn't. It would have come to the same thing in courts with judges, said Phyllis. Don't be snarky, Peter. It isn't our fault your secrets are so jolly easy to find out. She took his arm and he led her. There's an awful lot of coal in the cellar anyhow, he went on. Oh, don't, said Bobby. I don't think we ought to be glad about that. I don't know, said Peter, plucking up spirit. I'm not at all sure now, even now that mining is a crime. But the girls were quite sure, and they were also quite sure that he was quite sure, however little he cared to own it. Chapter 3. The Old Gentleman. After the adventure of Peter's coal mine, it seemed well to the children to keep away from the station. But they did not. They could not keep away from the railway. They had lived all their lives in a street where cabs and omnibuses rumbled by at all hours, and the carts of butchers and bakers and candlestick makers — I never saw a candlestick maker's cart, did you? — might occur at any moment. Here, in the deep silence of the sleepy country, the only things that went by were the trains. They seemed to be all that was left to link the children to the old life that had once been theirs. Straight down the hill in front of 3 Chimneys, the daily passage of their 6 feet began to mark a path across the crisp, short turf. They began to know the hours when certain trains passed, and they gave names to them. The 9:15 up was called the Green Dragon. The 10:07 down was the Worm of Wantley. The Midnight Town Express, whose shrieking rush they sometimes woke from their dreams to hear, was the Fearsome Fly-by-Night. Peter got up once in chill starshine and peeped at it through his curtains, named it on the spot. It was by the Green Dragon that the old gentleman travelled. He was a very nice-looking old gentleman, and he looked as if he were nice too, which is not at all the same thing. He had a fresh-coloured, clean-shaven face and white hair, and he wore rather odd-shaped collars and a top hat that wasn't exactly the same kind as other people's. Of course, the children didn't see all this at first. In fact, the first thing they noticed about the old gentleman was his hand. It was one morning as they sat on the fence waiting for the Green Dragon, which was 3¼ minutes late by Peter's Waterbury watch that he had given him on his last birthday. The green dragon's going where Father is, said Phyllis. If it were a really real dragon, we could stop it and ask it to take our love to Father. Dragons don't carry people's love, said Peter. They'd be above it. Yes, they do. If you tame them thoroughly first, they'll fetch and carry like pet spaniels, said Phyllis, and feed out of your hand. I wonder why Father never writes to us. Mother says he's been too busy, said Bobby. But he'll write soon, she says. I say, Phyllis suggested, let's all wave to the green dragon as it goes by. If it's a magic dragon, it'll understand and take our loves to Father, and if it isn't, 3 waves aren't much. We shall never miss them. So when the green dragon tore shrieking out of the mouth of its dark lair, which was the tunnel, all 3 children stood on the railing and waved their pocket handkerchiefs without stopping to think whether they were clean handkerchiefs or the reverse. They were, as a matter of fact, very much the reverse. And out of a first-class carriage, a hand waved back, a quite clean hand. It held a newspaper. It was the old gentleman's hand. After this, it became the custom for waves to be exchanged between the children and the 9:15. And the children, especially the girls, liked to think that perhaps the old gentleman knew Father and would meet him in business, wherever that shady retreat might be, and tell him how his 3 children stood on a rail far away in the green country and waved their love to him every morning, wet or fine. For they were now able to go out in all sorts of weather, such as they would never have been allowed to go out in when they lived in their villa house. This was Aunt Emma's doing, and the children felt more and more that they had not been quite fair to this unattractive aunt, when they found how useful were the long gaiters and waterproof coats that they had laughed at her for buying for them. Mother, all this time, was very busy with her writing. She used to send off a good many long blue envelopes with stories in them, and large envelopes of different sizes and colors used to come to her. Sometimes she would sigh when she opened them and say, "Another story come home to roost. Oh dear, oh dear." And then the children would be very sorry. But sometimes she would wave the envelope in the air and say, "Hooray, hooray, there's a sensible editor. He's taken my story, and this is the proof of it." At first the children thought the proof meant the letter the sensible editor had written, but they presently got to know that the proof was the long slips of paper with the story printed on them. Whenever an editor was sensible, there were buns for tea. One day Peter was going down to the village to get buns to celebrate the sensibleness of the editor of the Children's Globe when he met the station master. Peter felt very uncomfortable, for he had now had time to think over the affair of the coal mine. He did not like to say good morning to the station master, as you usually do to anyone you meet on a lonely road, because he had a hot feeling, which spread even to his ears, that the station master might not care to speak to a person who had stolen coals. Stolen is a nasty word, but Peter felt it was the right one, so he looked down and said nothing. It was the station master who said "Good morning" as he passed by, and Peter answered, "Good morning." Then he thought, perhaps he doesn't know who I am by daylight, or he wouldn't be so polite. And he did not like the feeling which thinking this gave him. And then, before he knew what he was going to do, he ran after the station master, who stopped when he heard Peter's hasty boots crunching the road, and coming up with him very breathless, and with his ears now quite magenta-colored, he said, "I don't want you to be polite to me if you don't know me when you see me." "Eh?" said the station master. "I thought perhaps you didn't know it was me that took the coals," Peter went on, "when you said good morning, but it was, and I'm sorry. There." "Why," said the station master, "I wasn't thinking anything at all about precious coals. Let bygones be bygones. And where are you off to in such a hurry?" "I'm going to buy buns for tea," said Peter. "I thought you were all so poor," said the station master. "So we are," said Peter confidently. "But we always have 3 pennyworth and halfpennies for tea whenever Mother sells a story or a poem or anything." "Ah," said the station master. "So your mother writes stories, does she?" "The beautifulest you'll ever read," said Peter. "You ought to be very proud to have such a clever mother." "Yes," said Peter, "but she used to play with us more before she had to be so clever." "Well," said the station master, "I must be getting along. You give us a look in at the station whenever you feel so inclined. And as to coals, it's a word that, well, I know we never mention it, eh?" "Thank you," said Peter. "I'm very glad it's all straightened out between us." And he went on across the canal bridge to get the village to get the buns, feeling more comfortable in his mind than he had felt since the hand of the station master had fastened on his collar that night among the coals. Next day, when they had sent the threefold wave of greeting to Father by the Green Dragon, and the old gentleman had waved back as usual, Peter proudly led the way to the station.
But ought we?
said Bobby.
After the coals, she means,
Phyllis explained.
I met the station master yesterday,
said Peter in an offhand way, and he pretended not to hear what Phyllis had said.
He expressly invited us to go down any time we liked. After the coals, said Phyllis. Stop a minute, my bootlace is undone again.
Oh, it is always undone again, said Peter, and the station master was more of a gentleman than you'll ever be, Phil, throwing a coal at a chap's head like that. Phyllis did up her bootlace and went on in silence, but her shoulders shook, and presently a fat tear fell off her nose and splashed on the metal of the railway line. Bobby saw it.
Why, what's the matter, darling?
she said, stopping short and putting her arm around the heaving shoulders.
He called me ungentlemanly, sobbed Phyllis. I didn't never call him unladylike, not even when he tied my Clorinda to the firewood bundle and burned her at the stake for a martyr.
Peter had indeed perpetrated this outrage a year or two before.
Well, you began, you know, said Bobby, honestly, about coals and all that. Don't you think you better both unsay everything since the wave, and let Honor be satisfied? I will if Peter will, said Phyllis, sniffling.
All right, said Peter. Honor is satisfied. Here, use my hanky, Phil, for goodness sake. If you've lost yours as usual, I wonder what you do with them.
You had my last one, said Phyllis indignantly, to tie up the rabbit hutch door with. But you're very ungrateful. It's quite right what it says in the poetry book about sharper than a serpent is to have a toothless child, but it means ungrateful when it says toothless. Mrs. Lowe told me so.
All right, said Peter impatiently. I'm sorry. There. Now, will you come on? They reached the station and spent a joyous 2 hours with the porter. He was a worthy man and seemed never tired of answering the questions that began with why, which many people in higher ranks of life often seem wary of. He told them many things that they had not known before, as, for instance, that the things that hook the carriages together are called couplings, and that the pipes, like great serpents that hang over the couplings, are meant to stop the train with.
If you could get a hold of one of them when the train is going and pull them apart, said he, she'd stop dead with a jerk. Who's she? said Phyllis. Train, of course, said the porter. After that, the train was never again it to the children. And you know, the thing on the carriages where it says on £5 fine for improper use, if you was to improperly use that, the train would stop.
And if you used it properly, said Roberta.
It'd stop just the same, I suppose,
said he.
But it isn't proper use unless you're being murdered. There was an old lady once. Someone kidded her on with it as it was a refreshment room bell, and she used it improper, not being in danger of her life, though hungry, and when the train stopped and the guard came along expecting to find someone weltering in the last moment, she says, "Oh, please, mister, I'll take a glass of stout and a bath bun," she says, and the train was 7 minutes behind her time as it was.
What did the guard say to the old lady?
I don't know, replied the porter, but I lay she didn't forget it in a hurry, whatever it was.
In such delightful conversation, the time went by all too quickly. Peter, it's a fart. The station master came out once or twice from the sacred inner temple behind the place where the hole is that they sell you tickets through, and was most jolly with them all.
Just as if coal had never been discovered,
Phyllis whispered to her sister. He gave them each an orange and promised to take them up to the signal box one of these days when he wasn't so busy. Several trains went through the station, and Peter noticed for the first time that the engines have numbers on them, like cabs.
Yeah, said the porter. I knowed a young gent as used to take down the numbers of every single one he seed, and a green notebook with silver corners on it was owing to his father being very well-to-do in the wholesale stationery.
Peter felt that he could take down numbers too, even if he was not the son of a wholesale stationer. As he did not happen to have a green leather notebook with silver corners, the porter gave him a yellow envelope, and on it he noted
379 and 663, and felt that this was the beginning of what would be a most interesting collection. That night at tea, he asked Mother if she had a green leather notebook with silver corners. She had not, but when she heard what he wanted it for, she gave him a little black one. "It has a few pages torn out," she said, "but it will hold quite a lot of numbers, and when it's full, I'll give you another. I'm so glad you like the railway, only please, you mustn't walk on the line." "Not if we face the way the train's coming?" asked Peter, after a gloomy pause in which glances of despair were exchanged. "No, really not," said Mother. Then Phyllis said, "Mother, didn't you ever walk on the railway lines when you were little?" Mother was an honest and honourable mother, so she had to say yes. "Well then," said Phyllis. "But darlings, you don't know how fond I am of you. What should I do if you got hurt?" "Are you fonder of us than Granny was of you when you were little?" Phyllis asked. Bobby made signs to her to stop, but Phyllis never did see signs, no matter how plain they might be. Mother did not answer for a minute. She got up to put more water in the teapot. "No one," she said at last, "ever loved anyone more than my mother loved me." Then she was quiet again, and Bobby kicked Phyllis hard under the table, because Bobby understood a little bit the thoughts that were making Mother so quiet, the thoughts of the time when Mother was a little girl and was all the world to her mother. It seems so easy and natural to run to Mother when one is in trouble. Bobby understood a little how people do not leave off running to their mothers when they are in trouble, even when they are grown up, and she thought she knew a little what it must be to be sad and have no mother to run to any more. So she kicked Phyllis, who said, "What are you kicking me like that for, Bob?" And then Mother laughed a little and sighed and said, "Very well then. Only let me be sure you do know which way the trains come, and don't walk on the line near the tunnel or near corners." "Trains keep to the left, like carriages," said Peter. "So if we keep to the right, we're bound to see them coming." "Very well," said Mother, and I dare say you think that she ought not to have said it, but she remembered about when she was a little girl herself, and she did say it. And neither her own children, nor you, nor any other children in the world could ever understand exactly what it cost her to do it. Only some few of you, like Bobby, may understand a very little bit. It was the very next day that Mother had to stay in bed because her head ached so. Her hands were burning hot, and she would not eat anything, and her throat was very sore. "If I was you, Mum," said Miss Vinny, "I should take and send for the doctor. There's a lot of catchy complaints are going about just now. My sister's eldest, she took a chill and it went to her inside 2 years ago come Christmas, and she's never been the same girl since." Mother wouldn't at first, but in the evening she felt so much worse that Peter was sent to the house in the village that had 3 laburnum trees by the gate, and on the gate a brass plate with W.W. Forrest, M.D. on it. W.W. Forrest, M.D. came at once. He talked to Peter on the way back. He seemed a most charming and sensible man, interested in railways and rabbits and really important things. When he had seen Mother, he said it was influenza. "Now, Lady Graveairs," he said in the hall to Bobby, "I suppose you'll want to be head nurse." "Of course," she said. "Well then, I'll send down some medicine. Keep up a good fire, have some strong beef tea made ready to give her as soon as the fever goes down. She can have grapes now, and beef essence, and soda water and milk. And you'd better get it in a bottle of brandy. The best brandy. Cheap brandy is worse than poison." She asked him to write it all down, and he did. When Bobby showed Mother the list he had written, Mother laughed. It was a laugh, Bobby decided, though it was rather cold and feeble. "Nonsense," said Mother, lying in bed with eyes as bright as beads. "I can't afford all that rubbish. Tell Mrs. Viney to boil 2 pounds of scrag end at the neck of your dinners tomorrow, and I can have some of the broth. Yes, I should like some more water now, love. And will you get a basin and sponge my hands?" Roberta obeyed. When she had done everything she could to make Mother less uncomfortable, she went down to the others. I was confused. She went down to the others. Her cheeks were very red, her lips set tight, and her eyes shone as bright as Mother's. She told them what the doctor had said and what Mother had said. "And now," she said, when she had told all, "there's no one but us to do anything, and we've got to do it. I've got the shilling for the mutton." "We can do without the beastly mutton," said Mud Peter. "Bread and butter will support life. People have lived on less in desert islands many a time." "Of course, said his sister, and Mrs. Vinny was sent to the village to get as much brandy and soda water and beef tea as she could buy for a shilling.
But even if we never have anything to eat at all, said Phyllis, you can't get all those other things with our dinner money.
No, said Bobby, frowning. We must find out some other way. Now think, everybody, just as hard as ever you can. They did think, and presently they talked. And later, when Bobby had gone up to sit with Mother in case she wanted anything, the other two were very busy with scissors and a white sheet and a paintbrush, and the pot of Brunswick black that Mrs. Vinny used for grates and fenders. They did not manage to do what they wished exactly with the first sheet, so they took another out of the linen cupboard. It did not occur to them that they were spoiling good sheets, which cost good money. They only knew that they were making a good, but what they were making comes later. Bobby's bed had been moved into Mother's room, and several times in the night she got up to mend the fire and to give her mother milk and soda water. Mother talked to herself a good deal, but it did not seem to mean anything, and once she woke up suddenly and called out, "Mama! Mama!" And Bobby knew she was calling for Granny, and that she had forgotten that it was no use calling because Granny was dead. In the early morning, Bobby heard her name and jumped out of bed and ran to Mother's bedside.
Yes. I think I was asleep, said Mother. My poor little duck, how tired you'll be. I do hate to give you all this trouble.
Trouble, said Bobby.
Don't cry, sweet, Mother said. I shall be all right in a day or two.
And Bobby said, yes, and tried to smile. When you are used to 10 hours of solid sleep, to get up 3 or 4 times in your sleep time makes you feel as though you had been up all night. Bobby felt quite stupid, and her eyes were sore and stiff, but she tidied the room and arranged everything neatly before the doctor came. This was 8:30. "Everything going on all right, little nurse?" he said at the front door. "Did you get the brandy?"
I've got the brandy, said Bobby, in a little flat bottle.
I didn't see the grapes or the beef tea, though, he said.
No, said Bobby firmly, but you will tomorrow, and there's some beef stewing in the oven for beef tea.
Who told you to do that? He asked.
I noticed what Mother did when Phil had mumps.
Right, said the doctor. Now you get your old woman to sit with your mother, and then you eat a good breakfast and go straight to bed and sleep till dinner time. We can't afford to have the head nurse ill. He was really quite a nice doctor. When the 9:15 came out of the tunnel that morning, the old gentleman in the first-class carriage put down his newspaper and got ready to wave his hand to the 3 children on the fence. But this morning, they were not there. This morning there were not 3. There was only 1, and that was Peter. Peter was not on the railings either, as usual. He was standing in front of them, in an attitude like that of a showman showing off the animals in a menagerie, or of the kind of clergyman when he points with a wand at the scenes from Palestine when there is a magic lantern and he is explaining it. This isn't going great for Mother, I know. Your commentary is killing me. Peter was pointing, too, and what he was pointing at was a large white sheet nailed against the fence. On the sheet there were thick black letters more than a foot long. Some of them had run a little, because of Phyllis having to put the Brunswick black on too eagerly, but the words were quite easy to read, and this was what the old gentleman and several other people in the train read in the large black letters on the white sheet. Look out at the station. A good many people did look out at the station, and were disappointed, for they saw nothing unusual. The old gentleman looked out too, and at first he too saw nothing more unusual than the gravelled platform and the sunshine and the wallflowers and forget-me-nots in the station borders. It was only just as the train was beginning to pull off and pull itself together to start again that he saw Phyllis. She was quite out of breath with running.
"Oh," he said, "I thought I'd missed you. My bootlaces would—"
Oh, this is her, sorry.
"Oh," she said, "I thought I'd missed you. My bootlaces wouldn't keep coming down, and I fell over them twice. Here, take it."
She threw a warm, dampish letter into his hands as the train moved. He leaned back in his corner and opened the letter. This is what he read. Dear Mister, we do not know your name. Mother is ill, and the doctor says to give her the things at the end of the letter, but she says we can't afford it, and to get mutton for us, and she will have the broth. We do not know anybody here but you, because Father is away, and we do not know the address. Father will pay you, or if he has lost all his money or anything, Peter will pay you when he is a man. We promise it on our honor. I owe you for all the things Mother wants. Signed, Peter. Will you give this the parcel to the station master because of us not knowing what train you come down by. Say it is for Peter that was sorry about the coals, and he will know all right. Roberta, Phyllis, and Peter.
Peter will pay it when he is a man. I'm going to try that next time I have a bill. I'm going to write them back and say, I will pay this when I am a woman. I'll pay this when I grow up. Trick is to never grow up.
Then came the list of things the doctor had ordered. The old gentleman read through it once, and his eyebrows went up. He read it twice and smiled a little. When he had read it twice, he put it in his pocket and went on reading the Times. At about 6 that evening, there was a knock at the back door. The 3 children rushed to open it, and there stood the friendly porter, who had told them so many interesting things about railways. He dumped down a big hamper on the kitchen flags. "Oh, gent," he said, "he asked me to fetch it straight up away." "Fetch it up straight away."
Thank you so much, said Peter. And then, as the porter lingered, he added, I'm most awfully sorry. I haven't got 2p to give you like father does, but...
You drop it if you please, said the porter indignantly. I wasn't thinking about no tuppences. I only wanted to say I was sorry for your mamma wasn't so well, and to ask how she finds herself this evening. And I fetched her along a bit of sweetbriar, very sweet to smell it. Is 2p indeed, said he, and produced a bunch of sweetbriar from his hat, just like a conjurer, as Phyllis remarked afterwards.
Thank you very much, said Peter, and I beg your pardon about the 2p.
No offence, said the porter, untruly but politely, and went. Then the children undid the hamper. First there was straw, and then there were fine shavings, and then came all the things they had asked for, and plenty of them, and then a good many things they had not asked for, among others peaches and port wine and 2 chickens, a cardboard box of big red roses with long stalks, and a tall, thin green bottle of lavender water, and 3 smaller, fatter bottles of eau de cologne. There was a letter, too. Dear Roberta and Phyllis and Peter, it said, here are the things you want. Your mother will want to know where they came from. Tell her they were sent by a friend who heard she was ill. When she is well again, you must tell her all about it, of course. And if she says you ought not to have asked for things, tell her that I say you were quite right, and that I hope she will forgive me for taking the liberty of allowing myself a great pleasure. The letter was signed G.P., something that the children couldn't read.
I think we were right, said Phyllis. Right, of course we were right, said Bobby. All the same, said Peter with his hands in his pockets, I don't exactly look forward to telling Mother the whole truth about it. We're not to do it until she's well, said Bobby, and when she's well, we shall be so happy we shan't mind the little fuss like that. Oh, just look at the roses. I must take them up to her. And the sweetbriar, said Phyllis, sniffing it loudly. Don't forget the sweetbriar. As if I should, said Roberta. Mother told me the other day there was a thick hedge of it at her mother's house when she was a little girl.
Chapter 4. The Engine Burglar. We are almost... Let me see. I think there are only... How many chapters are there? Let's see. There are 14 chapters. Okay. Chapter 4. The Engine Burglar. What was left of the second sheet and the Brunswick Black came in very nicely to make a banner bearing the legend, She is nearly well. Thank you. And this was displayed to the Green Dragon about a fortnight after the arrival of the wonderful hamper. The old gentleman saw it and waved a cheerful response from the train, and when this had been done, the children saw that now was the time when they must tell Mother what they had done when she was ill. And it did not seem nearly so easy as they had thought it would be, but it had to be done. And it was done. Mother was extremely angry. She was seldom angry, and now she was angrier than they had ever known her. This was horrible, but it was much worse when she suddenly began to cry. Crying is catching, I believe, like measles and whooping cough. At any rate, everyone at once found itself taking part in a crying party. Mother stopped first. She dried her eyes, and then she said, I'm sorry I was so angry, darlings, because I know you didn't understand. We didn't mean to be naughty, Mummy, sobbed Bobby, and Peter and Phyllis sniffled. Now listen, said Mother. It's quite true that we're poor, but we have enough to live on. You mustn't go telling everyone about our fares. It's not right. And you must never, never, never ask strangers to give you things.
Now always remember that, won't you?" They all hugged her and rubbed their damp cheeks against hers and promised that they would. "And I'll write a letter to your old gentleman, and I shall tell him that I didn't approve. Oh, of course I shall thank him, too, for his kindness. It's you I don't approve of, my darlings, not the old gentleman. He was as kind as ever he could be, and you can give the letter to the station master to give him, and we won't say any more about it." Afterwards, when the children were alone, Bobby said, "Isn't Mother splendid? You catch any other grown-up saying they were sorry they'd been angry." "Yes," said Peter, "she is splendid, but it's rather awful when she's angry."
She's like avenging and bright in the song, said Phyllis. I should like to look at her if it wasn't so awful. She looks so beautiful when she's really downright furious.
They took the letter down to the station master. "I thought you said you hadn't had any friends except in London," said he.
"We've made 'em since," said Peter.
"But he doesn't live hereabouts?"
"No, we just know him on the railway."
Then the station master retired to that sacred inner temple behind the little window where the tickets are sold, and the children went down to the porter's room and talked to the porter. They learned several interesting things from him, among others that his name was Perks. Then that he was married and had 3 children, that the lamps in front of the engines are called headlights, and the ones at the back tail lights.
"And that just shows," whispered Phyllis, "that trains really are dragons in disguise, with proper heads and tails."
It was on this day that the children first noticed that all engines are not alike. "Alike?" said the porter, whose name was Perks. "Lord love you, no, miss. No more alike nor what you and me are. That little without a tender as went by just now all on her own, that was a tank, that was. She's off to do some shunting t'other side of Maidbridge. That's as might be you, miss. Then there's goods engines, great strong things with 3 wheels each side, joined with rods to strengthen them, as it might be me. Then there's mainline engines, and it might be this here young gentleman when he grows up and wins all the races at his school. So he will. The mainline's engine, she's built for speed as well as power. That one's to the 915's up."
"The Green Dragon," said Phyllis.
"We call her the Snail, miss, among ourselves," said the porter. "She's oftener behind than nor any train on the line."
"But the engine's green," said Phyllis.
"Yes, miss," and Perks. "So's a snail some seasons of the year." The children agreed as they went home to dinner that the porter was most delightful company. Next day was Roberta's birthday. In the afternoon she was politely but firmly requested to get out of the way and keep there till tea time.
"You aren't going to see what we're going to do till it's done. It's a glorious surprise," said Phyllis.
"Which train are you? Tag yourself? I'm Snail." Oh my god, you know how it's always like, which Spice Girl are you? Which Sailor Scout are you? It's true. And Roberta went out into the garden all alone. She tried to be grateful, but she felt she would much rather have helped in whatever it was than to have to spend her birthday afternoon by herself, no matter how glorious the surprise might be. Now that she was alone, she had time to think, and one of the things she thought of most was what Mother had said in one of those feverish nights when her hands were so hot and her eyes were so bright. The words were, "Oh, what a doctor's bill there'll be for this." She walked round and round the garden among the rose bushes that hadn't any roses yet, only buds, and the lilac bushes and the syringas and American currants, and the more she thought of the doctor's bill, the less she liked the thought of it. And presently she made up her mind. She went out through the side door of the garden and climbed up the steep field to where the road runs along by the canal. She walked along until she came to the bridge that crosses the canal and leads to the village, and here she waited. It was very pleasant in the sunshine to lean one's elbow on the warm stone of the bridge and look down at the blue water of the canal. Bobby had never seen any other canal, except the Regent's Canal, and the water of that is not at all a pretty color. And she had never seen any river at all except the Thames, which also would be all the better if its face was washed. Perhaps the children would have loved the canal as much as the railway, but for 2 things. One was that they had found the railway first, on that first wonderful morning when the house and the country and the moors and rocks and great hills were all new to them. They had not found the canal till some days later. The other reason was that everyone on the railway had been kind to them, the station master, the porter, and the old gentleman who waved, and the people on the canal were anything but kind. The people on the canal were, of course, the bargees.
who steered the slow barges up and down, or walked beside the old horses that trampled up the mud of the towing path and strained at the long tow ropes. Peter had once asked one of the bargers the time, and had been told to get out of that in a tone so fierce that he did not stop to say anything about his having just as much right on the towing path as the man himself. Indeed, he did not even think of saying it till some time later. Then another day, when the children thought they would like to fish in the canal, a boy in a barge threw lumps of coal at them, and one of these hit Phyllis on the back of the neck. She was just stooping down to tie up her bootlace, and though the coal hardly hurt at all, it made her not care very much about going on fishing. On the bridge, however, Roberta felt quite safe, because she could look down on the canal, and if any boy showed signs of meaning to throw coal, she could duck behind the parapet. Presently there were a sound of wheels, which was just what she expected. The wheels were the wheels of the doctor's dog cart, and in the cart, of course, was the doctor. He pulled up and called out, "Hello, head nurse. Want a lift?"
"I wanted to see you,"
said Bobby. "Your mother's not worse, I hope," said the doctor.
"No, but—"
"Well, step in then, and we'll go for a drive." Roberta climbed in, and the brown horse was made to turn round, which it did not like at all, for it was looking forward to its tea. Its oats.
"This is jolly,"
said Bobby, and the dog cart flew along the road by the canal. "We could throw a stone down any one of your 3 chimneys," said the doctor as they passed the house.
"Yes," said Bobby, "but you'd have to be jolly good shot."
"How do you know I'm not?" said the doctor. "Now then, what's the trouble?" Bobby fidgeted with the hook of the driving apron. "Come, out with it," said the doctor.
"It's rather hard, you see," said Bobby, "to out with it, because of what Mother said."
"What did Mother say?"
"She said I wasn't to go telling everyone that we're poor, but you aren't to everyone, are you?"
"Not at all," said the doctor cheerfully. "Well?"
"Well, I know doctors are very extravagant. I mean expensive. And Mrs. Vinny told me that her doctoring only cost her 2 pence a week because she belonged to a club."
"Yes?"
"You see, she told me what a good doctor you were, and I asked her how she could afford you, because she's much poorer than we are. I've been in her house, and I know, and then she told me about the club, and I thought I'd ask you, and oh, I don't want Mother to be worried. Can't we be in the club too, the same as Mrs. Vinny?"
The doctor was silent. He was rather poor himself, and he had been pleased at getting a new family to attend, so I think his feelings at the moment were rather mixed.
"You aren't cross with me, are you?"
said Bobby in a very small voice. The doctor roused himself. "Cross? How could I be? You're a very sensible little woman. Now look here, don't you worry. I'll make it all right with your mother, even if I have to make a special brand new club all for her. Look here, this is where the aqueduct begins."
"What's the what's its name?"
asked Bobby. "A water bridge," said the doctor. "Look." The road rose to a bridge over the canal. To the left was a steep rocky cliff with trees and shrubs growing into the cracks of the rock, and the canal here left off running along the top of the hill and started to run on a bridge of its own, a great bridge with tall arches that went right across the valley. Bobby drew a long breath. "It's grand, isn't it?" she said.
"It's like pictures in the history of Rome."
"Right," said the doctor. "That's just exactly what it is like. The Romans were dead nuts on aqueducts. It's a splendid piece of engineering."
"I thought engineering was making engines."
"Ah, there are different sorts of engineering. Making roads and bridges and tunnels is one kind, and making fortifications is another. Well, we must be turning back, and remember, you aren't to worry about doctor's bills, or you'll be ill yourself, and then I'll send you a bill as long as the aqueduct." When Bobby had parted from the doctor at the top of the field that ran down from the road to 3 Chimneys, she could not feel that she had done wrong. She knew that Mother would perhaps think differently, but Bobby felt that for once she was the one who was right, and she scrambled down the rocky slope and with a really happy feeling. I think so. It's like insurance. Like you pay, like is it 2 pence a week or 2 pence a month or whatever, and then that kind of covers you. Phyllis and Peter met her at the back door. They were unnaturally clean and neat, and Phyllis's had a red bow in her hair. There was only just time for Bobby to make herself tidy and tie up her hair with a blue bow before a little bell rang.
"There," said Phyllis. "That's to show the surprise is ready. Now you wait till the bell rings again, then you may come into the dining room."
So Bobby waited. "Tinkle, tinkle," said the little bell, and Bobby went into the dining room, feeling rather shy. Directly she opened the door and found herself, as it seemed, in a new world of light and flowers and singing. Mother and Peter and Phyllis were standing in a row at the end of the table. The shutters were shut, and there were 12 candles on the table. one for each of Roberta's years. The table was covered with a sort of pattern of flowers, and at Roberta's place was a thick wreath of forget-me-nots and several most interesting little packages. And Mother and Phyllis and Peter were singing, to the first part of the tune of St. Patrick's Day. Roberta knew that Mother had written the words on purpose for her birthday. It was a little way of Mother's on birthdays. It had begun on Bobby's 4th birthday when Phyllis was a baby. Bobby remembered learning the verses to say to Father for a surprise. She wondered if Mother had remembered too. The 4-year-old verse had been, Daddy dear, I'm only 4, and I'd rather not be more. 4's the nicest age to be, 2 and 2 and 1 and 3. What I love is 2 and 2, Mother, Peter, Phil, and you. What you love is 1 and 3, Mother, Peter, Phil, and me. Give your little girl a kiss, because she learned and told you this. The song the others were singing now went like this. Ah, darling Roberta, no sorrow shall hurt her if we can prevent it her whole life long. Her birthday's our fete day, we'll make it our great day and give her her presents and sing her our song. May pleasures attend her and may fate send her the happiest journey along her life's way, with skies bright above her and dear ones to love her. Dear Bob, many happy returns of the day. When they had finished singing, they cried, 3 cheers for our Bobby, and gave them very loudly. Bobby felt exactly as though she were going to cry. You know that odd feeling in the bridge of your nose and the prickling in your eyelids. But before she had time to begin, they were all kissing and hugging her. Now, said Mother, look at your presents. They were very nice presents. There was a green and red needlebook that Phyllis had made herself in secret moments. There was a darling little silver brooch of Mother's shaped like a buttercup, which Bobby had known and loved for years, but which she had never thought would come to be her own. There was also a pair of blue glass vases from Mrs. Vinnie. Roberta had seen and admired them in the village shop. And there were 3 birthday cards with pretty pictures and wishes. Mother fitted the forget-me-not crown on Bobby's brown head. And now look at the table, she said. There was a cake on the table covered with white sugar, with dear Bobby on it and pink sweets, and there were buns and jam, but the nicest thing was that the big table was almost covered with flowers. Wallflowers were laid all round the tea tray. There was a ring of forget-me-nots round each plate. The cake had a wreath of bright lilac around it, and in the middle was something that looked like a pattern, all done with single blooms of lilac or wallflower or laburnum. What is it? Asked Roberta. It's a map! A map of the railway, cried Peter. Look at those lilac lines of the metals, and there's the station down in brown wallflowers. The laburnum is the train, and there are the signal boxes, and the road up to here, and there's fat red daisies, us 3 raving to the old gentleman. That's him, and the pansies in the laburnum train. And there's 3 chimneys done in the purple primroses, said Phyllis. And that little tiny rosebud is Mother looking for us when we're late for tea. Peter invented it all, and we got all the flowers from the station. We thought you'd like it better. That's my present, said Peter, suddenly dumping down his adored steam engine on the table in front of her. Its tender had been lined with fresh white paper and was full of sweets. Oh, Peter, cried Bobby, quite overcome by this munificence. Not your own dear little engine that you're so fond of. Oh, no, said Peter very promptly. Not the engine, only the sweets. Bobby couldn't help her face changing a little, not so much because she was disappointed at not getting the engine, as because she had thought it so very noble of Peter, and now she felt she had been silly to think it. Also, she felt she must have seemed greedy to expect the engine as well as the sweets, so her face changed. Peter saw it. He hesitated a minute, then his face changed too, and he said, I mean, not all the engine. I'll let you go halves if you like. You're a brick, cried Bobby. It's a splendid present, she said, no more aloud, but to herself she said, That was awfully decent of Peter, because I know he didn't mean to. Well, the broken half shall be my half of the engine, and I'll get it mended and give it back to Peter for his birthday. Yes, Mother dear, I should like to cut the cake, she added, and tea began. It was a delightful birthday. After tea, Mother played games with them, any games they liked, and of course their first choice was blindman's bluff, in the course of which Bobby's forget-me-not wreath twisted itself crookedly over one of her ears and stayed there. Then, when it was near bedtime and time to calm down, Mother had a lovely new story to read them. You won't sit up late working, will you, Mother? Bobby asked as they said good night. And Mother said no, she wouldn't. She would only just write to Father and then go to bed. But when Bobby crept down later to bring up her presents, for she felt she really could not be separated from them all night, Mother was not writing, but leaning her head on her arms and her arm on the table. I think it was rather good of Bobby to slip quietly away, saying over and over, "She doesn't want me to know she's unhappy, and I won't know. I won't know." But it made a sad end to the birthday. The very next morning, Bobby began to watch her opportunity to get Peter's engine mended secretly. And the opportunity came the very next afternoon. Mother went by train to the nearest town to do shopping. When she went there, she always went to the post office, perhaps to post her letters to Father, for she never gave them to the children, or Mrs. Vinny to post, and she never went to the village herself. Peter and Phyllis went with her. Bobby wanted an excuse not to go, but try as she would, she couldn't think of a good one. And just when she felt that all was lost, her frock caught on a big nail by the kitchen door, and there was a great criss-cross tear all along the front of the skirt. I assure you this really was an accident. So the others pitied her and went without her, for there was no time for her to change, because they were rather late already, and had to hurry to the station to catch the train. When they had gone, Bobby put on her everyday frock and went down to the railway. She did not go into the station, but she went along the line to the end of the platform, where the engine is when the down train is alongside the platform, the place where there are a water tank and a long, limp leather hose, like an elephant's trunk. She hid behind a bush on the other side of the railway. She had the toy engine done up in brown paper, and she waited patiently with it under her arm. Then, when the next train came in and stopped, Bobby went across the metals of the up line and stood beside the engine. She had never been so close to an engine before. It looked much larger and harder than she had expected, and it made her feel very small indeed, and somehow very soft, as if she could very, very easily be hurt rather badly. "Ah, I know what silkworms feel like now," said Bobby to herself. The engine driver and fireman did not see her. They were leaning out of the other side, telling the porter a tale about a dog and a leg of mutton. "If you please," said Roberta, but the engine was blowing off steam and no one heard her. "If you please, Mr. Engineer," she spoke a bit louder, but the engine happened to speak at the same moment, and of course Roberta's soft little voice hadn't a chance. It seemed to her that the only way would be to climb onto the engine and pull at their coats. The step was high, but she got her knee on it and clambered into the cab. She stumbled and fell on hands and knees on the base of the great heap of coals that led up to the square opening in the tender. The engine was not above the weakness of its fellows. It was making a great deal more noise than there was the slightest need for, and just as Roberta fell on the coals, the engine driver, who had turned without seeing her, started the engine, and when Bobby had picked herself up, the train was moving. Not fast, but much too fast for her to get off. All sorts of dreadful thoughts came to her all together in one horrible flash. There were such things as express trains, which went on, she supposed, for hundreds of miles without stopping. Suppose this should be one of them. How would she get home again? She had no money to pay for the return journey. "And I've no business here. I'm an engine burglar, that's what I am," she thought. "I shouldn't wonder if they could lock me up for this." And the train was going faster and faster. There was something in her throat that made it impossible for her to speak. She tried twice. The men had their backs to her. They were doing something to things that looked like taps. Suddenly, she put out her hand and caught hold of the nearest sleeve. The man turned with a start, and he and Roberta stood for a minute looking at each other in silence. Then the silence was broken by them both. The man said, "Here's a bloomin' go!" and Roberta burst into tears. The other man said he was bloomin' well blessed or something like it, but though naturally surprised, they were not exactly unkind. "You're a naughty little girl, that's what you are," said the fireman. But the engine driver said, "Darling little piece, I call her," but they made her sit down on an iron seat in the cab and told her to stop crying and tell them what she meant by it. She did stop as soon as she could. One thing that helped her was the thought that Peter would give almost his ears to be in her place, on a real engine, really going. The children had often wondered whether any engine driver could be found noble enough to take them for a ride on an engine, and now here she was. Excuse me. "Bobby, you dunce." She dried her eyes and sniffled earnestly. "Now then," said the fireman, "out with it. What do you mean by it, eh?" "Oh, please," sniffed Bobby and stopped. "Try again," said the engine driver encouragingly. Bobby tried again. "Please, Mr. Engineer," she said,
I did call out to you from the line, but you didn't hear me, and I just climbed up to touch you on the arm quite gently. I meant to do it, and then I fell into the coals, and I'm so sorry if I frightened you. Oh, don't be cross. Oh, please don't. She sniffled again. Oh, we ain't so much cross, said the fireman, as interested like. It ain't every day a little girl tumbles into our coal bunker out of the sky, is it, Bill? What did you do for it, eh? That's the point, agreed the engine driver. What did you do it for? Bobby found that she had not quite stopped crying. The engine driver patted her on the back and said, "Here, cheer up, mate. It ain't so bad as all that. Here, I'll be bound." I wanted, said Bobby, much cheered to find herself addressed as mate. I only wanted to ask if you'd be so kind as to mend this. She picked up the brown paper parcel from among the coals and undid the spring with hot red fingers that trembled. Her feet and legs felt the scorch of the engine fire, but her shoulders felt the wind chill the rush of the air. The engine lurched and shook and rattled, and as they shot under a bridge, the engine seemed to shout in her ears. The fireman shoveled on coals. Bobby unrolled the brown paper and disclosed the toy engine. I thought, she said wistfully, that perhaps you'd mend this for me, because you're an engineer, you know. The engine driver said he was blowed if he wasn't blessed. I'm blessed if I ain't blowed, remarked the fireman. But the engine driver took the little engine and looked at it, and the fireman ceased for an instant to shovel coal and looked too. It's like your precious cheek, said the engine driver. Whatever made you think we'd be bothered tinkering penny toys? I didn't mean for it for precious cheek, said Bobby. Only everybody that has anything to do with railways is so kind and good. I didn't think you'd mind. You don't really, do you? She added, for she had seen a not unkindly wink pass between the two. My trade's driving of an engine, not mending her. Especially such a outsizes engine as this here, said Bill. And how are we going to get you back with your sorrowing friends and relations and all be forgiven and forgotten? If you'll put me down next time you stop, said Bobby, firmly, though her heart beat fiercely against her arm as she clasped her hands, and lend me the money for a third-class ticket, I'll pay you back, honor bright. I'm not a confidence trick like in the newspapers. Really, I'm not. You're a little lady every inch, said Bill, relenting suddenly and completely. We'll see you get home safe. And about this engine, Jim, ain't you got near a pal like as can use a soldering iron? Seems to me that's about all little Bounder wants doing to it. That's what Father said, Bobby explained eagerly. What's that for? She pointed to a little brass wheel that he had turned as he spoke. That's the injector. In what? Injector fill up the boiler. Oh, said Bobby, mentally registering the fact to tell the others. That is interesting. This is the automatic brake, Bill went on, flattered by her enthusiasm. You just move this here little handle, do it with one finger. You can, and the train jolly soon stops. That's what they call the power of science in the newspapers. He showed her two little dials, like clock faces, and told her how one showed how much steam was going, and the other showed if the brake was working properly. By the time she had seen him shut off the steam with a big shining steel handle, Bobby knew more about the inside working of an engine than she had ever thought there was to know, and Jim had promised that his second cousin's wife's brother should solder the toy engine, or Jim would know the reason why. Because all the knowledge she had gained, Bobby felt that she and Bill and Jim were now friends for life, and that they had wholly and forever forgiven her for uninvited among the sacred coals of their tender. At Stacklepool Junction, she parted from them with warm expressions of mutual regard. They handed her over to the guard of a returning train, a friend of theirs, and she had the joy of knowing what guards do in their secret fastnesses, and understood how, when you pull the communication cord on railway carriages, a wheel goes round under the guard's nose, and a loud bell rings in his ears. She asked the guard why his van smelt so fishy, and learned that he had to carry a lot of fish every day, and that the wetness in the hollows of the corrugated floor had all drained out of the boxes full of plaice and cod and mackerel and soles and smelts. Bobby got home in time for tea, and she felt as though her mind would burst with all that had been put into it since she parted from the others. How she blessed the nail that had torn her frock. "Where have you been?" asked the others. "To the station, of course," said Roberta, but she would not tell a word of her adventures till the day appointed, when she mysteriously led them to the station at the hour of 3:19's transit, and proudly introduced them to her friends, Bill and Jim. Jim's second cousin's wife brother had not been unworthy of the sacred trust imposed in him. The toy engine was literally good as new. "Goodbye, oh goodbye,"
said Bobby, just before the engine screamed its goodbye. "I shall always, always love you, and Jim's second cousin's wife's brother as well." And as the three children went home up the hill, Peter hugging the engine, now quite its old self again, Bobby told with joyous leaps of the heart the story of how she had been an engine burglar. I'm going to become a confidence trickster. You'd be good at it, I think. That was good. That was a good chapter. I'm enjoying this. It makes sense that this was serialized. Exactly. Each chapter is kind of its own little adventure. Yeah. Chapter 5, Prisoners and Captives. What time is it? Okay. It was one day when Mother had gone to Maidbridge. She had gone alone, but the children were to go to the station to meet her. And loving the station as they did, it was only natural that they should be there a good hour before there was any chance of Mother's train arriving, even if the train were punctual, which was most unlikely. Sorry. No doubt they would have been just as early, even if it had been a fine day, and the delights of woods and fields and rocks and rivers had been open to them. But it happened to be a very wet day, and for July, very cold. There was a wild wind that drove flocks of dark purple clouds across the sky, like herds of dream elephants, as Phyllis said. And the rain stung sharply, so that the way to the station was finished at a run. Then the rain fell faster and harder, and beat slantwise against the windows of the booking office and of the chill place that had general waiting room on its door. "It's like being in a besieged castle," Phyllis said. "Look at the arrows of the foe striking against the battlements." "It's much more like a great garden squirt," said Peter. They decided to wait on the upside, for the down platform looked very wet indeed, and the train was driving right into the little black shelter, where the down passengers have to wait for their trains. The hour would be full of incident and of interest, for there would be 2 up trains and 1 down to look at before the one that should bring Mother back. "Perhaps it will have stopped raining by then," said Bobby. "Anyhow, I'm glad I brought Mother's waterproof and umbrella." They went into the desert spot labeled general waiting room, and the time passed pleasantly enough in a game of advertisements. You know the game, of course. It is something like Dumb Crambo. You can't reference one thing that makes no sense to explain another thing that doesn't make sense. Okay, let me read that again. The time passed pleasantly enough in a game of advertisements, which I don't know what that is. You know the game, of course. It is something like Dumb Crambo. I think it's going to explain it now, but I think that's very funny. The players take it in turns to go out and then come back and look as like some advertisement as they can, and the others have to guess what advertisement it is meant to be. Bobby came in and sat down under Mother's umbrella and made a sharp face, and everyone knew she was the fox who sits under the umbrella in the advertisement. Phyllis tried to make a magic carpet of Mother's waterproof, but it would not stand out stiff and raft-like as a magic carpet should, and nobody could guess it. Everyone thought Peter was carrying things a little too far when he blackened his face all over with coal dust and struck a spidery attitude and said he was the blot that advertises somebody's blue-black writing fluid. It was Phyllis's turn again, and she was trying to look like the Sphinx that advertises what's-his-name's personally conducted tours up the Nile, when the sharp ring of the signal announced the up train. The children rushed out to see it pass. On its engine were the particular driver and fireman who were numbered among the children's dearest friends. Courtesies passed between them. Jim asked after the toy engine, and Bobby pressed on his acceptance a moist, greasy package of toffee that she had made herself. Charmed by this attention, the engine driver consented to consider her request that some day he would take Peter for a ride on the engine. "Stand back, mates!" cried the engine driver suddenly. "And off she goes!" And sure enough, the train went. The children watched the taillights of the train till it disappeared round the curve of the line, and then turned to go back to the dusty freedom of the general waiting room and the joys of the advertisement game. They expected to see just 1 or 2 people, the end of the procession of passengers who had given up their tickets and gone away. Instead, the platform round the door of the station had a dark blot round it, and the dark blot was a crowd of people. "Oh!" cried Peter with a thrill of joyous excitement. "Something's happened! Come on!" They ran down the platform. When they got to the crowd, they could of course see nothing but the damp backs and elbows of the people on the crowds outside. Everybody was talking at once. It was evident that something had happened. "It's my belief he's nothing worse than a natural," said a farmerish-looking person. Peter saw his red, clean-shaven face as he spoke.
If you ask me, I should say it was a police court case, said a young man with a black bag.
Not at the infirmary, more like. Then the voice of the station master was heard, firm and official. Now then, move along there. I'll attend to this, if you please. But the crowd did not move, and then came a voice that thrilled the children through and through, for it spoke in a foreign language, and what is more, it was a language that they had never heard. They had heard French spoken, and German. Aunt Emma knew German, and tried to sing a song about beduten and zin and bin and zin. Nor was it Latin. Peter had been in Latin for 4 terms. It was some comfort, anyhow, to find that none of the crowd understood the foreign language any better than the children did.
What's that he's saying?
Asked the farmer heavily.
Sounds like French to me, said the station master, who had once been in Boulogne for the day.
It isn't French, cried Peter.
What is it then?
Asked more than one voice. The crowd fell back a little to see who had spoken, and Peter pressed forward so that when the crowd closed up again, he was in the front rank. I don't know what it is, said Peter, but it isn't French. I know that. Then he saw what it was the crowd had for its center. It was a man. The man, Peter did not doubt, who had spoken in that strange tongue. A man with long hair and wild eyes, with shabby clothes of a cut Peter had not seen before. A man whose hands and lips trembled, and who spoke again as his eyes fell on Peter. No, it's not French, said Peter.
Try him with French if you know so much about it, said the farmer man.
Parlez-vous français? Began Peter. That's exactly how it's written, just so you know. It's written parley, P-A-R-L-A-Y, vous, V-O-O, français, F-R-O-N-G-S-A-Y. Began Peter boldly, and the next moment the crowd recoiled again, for the man with the wild eyes had left leaning against the wall and had sprung forward and caught Peter's hands and began to pour forth a flood of words which, though he could not understand a word of them, Peter knew the sound of. There, said he, and turned his hands, still clasped in the hands of the strange shabby figure, and to throw a glance of triumph at the crowd. There, that's French.
What does he say?
I don't know. Peter was obliged to own it.
Here, said the station master again. If you move on, if you please, I'll deal with this case.
A few of the more timid or less inquisitive travellers moved slowly and reluctantly away, and Phyllis and Bobby got near to Peter. All 3 of them had been taught French at school. How deeply they now wished that they had learned it. Peter shook his head at the stranger, but he also shook his hands as warmly, and looked at him as kindly as he could. A person in the crowd, after some hesitation, said suddenly, No compreni, and then, blushing deeply, backed out of the press and went away. Take him into your room, whispered Bobby to the station master. Mother can talk French. She'll be here by the next train from Maidbridge. The station master took the arm of the stranger, suddenly but not unkindly, but the man wrenched his arm away and cowered back, coughing and trembling, and trying to push the station master away. Oh, don't, said Bobby. Don't you see how frightened he is? He thinks you're going to shut him up. I know he does. Look at his eyes.
They're like a fox's eyes when a beast's in a trap, said the farmer.
Oh, let me try, Bobby went on. I do really know 1 or 2 French words, if I could only think of them. Sometimes, in moments of great need, we can do wonderful things, things that in ordinary life we could hardly even dream of doing. Bobby had never been anywhere near the top of her French class, but she must have learned some things without knowing it, for now, looking at those wild, haunted eyes, she actually remembered, and what is more, spoke some French words. She said, Veux attendre, ma mère parlait français. Nu. What is the French word for being kind? Nobody knew. Bon is good, said Phyllis. Nu être bon pour vous. I do not know whether the man understood her words, but he understood the touch of the hand she thrust into his, and the kindness of the other hand that stroked his shabby sleeve. She pulled him gently towards the inmost sanctuary of the station master. The other children followed, and the station master shut the door in the face of the crowd, which stood a little while in the booking office, talking and looking at the fast-closed yellow door, and then by 1s and 2s went its way grumbling. Inside the station master's room, Bobby still held the stranger's hand and stroked his sleeve.
Here's a go, said the station master. No ticket,
doesn't even know where he wants to go. I'm not sure now, but what I ought to do is send for the police.
Oh, don't! The children pleaded at once, and suddenly Bobby got between the others and the stranger, for she had seen that he was crying. By a most unusual piece of good fortune, she had a handkerchief in her pocket. By a still more uncommon accident, the handkerchief was moderately clean. Standing in front of the stranger, she got the handkerchief and passed it to him so that the others did not see. Wait till Mother comes, Phyllis was saying. She does speak French beautifully. You'd just love to hear her.
I'm sure he hasn't done anything like you're sent to prison for, said Peter. It looks like without visible means to me, said the station master. Well, I don't mind giving him the benefit of the doubt till your mamma comes. I should like to know what nation's got the credit of him, that I should.
Then Peter had an idea. He pulled an envelope out of his pocket and showed that it was half full of foreign stamps. Look here, he said. Let's show him these. Bobby looked and saw that the stranger had dried his eyes with her handkerchief, so she said, All right. They showed him an Italian stamp and pointed from him to it back again, and made signs of questions with their eyebrows. He shook his head. Then they showed him a Norwegian stamp, the common blue kind it was, and again he signed no. Then they showed him a Spanish one, and at that he took the envelope from Peter's hand and searched among the stamps with a hand that trembled, the hand that he reached out at last, with a gesture of one answering a question, contained a Russian stamp. He's Russian, cried Peter, or else he's like the man who was in Kipling, you know. The train from Magebridge was singled. I'll stay with him till you bring Mother in, said Bobby.
You're not afraid, missy?
Oh, no, said Bobby, looking at the stranger as she might have looked at a strange dog of doubtful temper. You wouldn't hurt me, would you? She smiled at him, and he smiled back, a queer, crooked smile, and then he laughed again, and the heavy rattling swish of the incoming train swept past, and the station master and Peter and Phyllis went out to meet it. Bobby was still holding the stranger's hand when they came back with Mother. There is a lot of trust of adults in this story. The Russian rose and bowed very ceremoniously. Then Mother spoke in French, and he replied haltingly at first, but presently in longer and longer sentences. The children, watching his face and Mother's, knew that he was telling her things that made her angry, and pitying, and sorry, and indignant all at once.
Well, Mum, what's it all about?
The station master could not restrain his curiosity any longer. Oh, said Mother, it's all right. He's a Russian, and he's lost his ticket, and I'm afraid he's very ill. If you don't mind, I'll take him home with me now. He's really quite worn out. I'll run down and tell you about him tomorrow.
I hope you won't find you're taking home a frozen viper, said the station master doubtfully.
Oh, no, said Mother brightly, and she smiled. I'm quite sure I'm not. Why, he's a great man in his own country. Writes books, beautiful books. I've read some of them, but I'll tell you all about it tomorrow. She spoke again in French to the Russian, and everyone could see the surprise and pleasure and gratitude in his eyes. He got up and politely bowed to the station master, and offered his arm most ceremoniously to Mother. She took it, but anybody could have seen that she was helping him along, and not he her. You girls run home and light a fire in the sitting room, Mother said, and Peter had better go for the doctor. But it was Bobby who went for the doctor. I hate to tell you this, she said breathlessly when she came upon him in his shirt sleeves weeding his pansy bed, but Mother's got a very shabby Russian, and I'm sure he'll have to belong to your club. I'm certain he hasn't got any money. We found him at the station.
Found him? Was he lost then? Asked the doctor, reaching for his coat.
Yes, said Bobby unexpectedly. That's just what he was. He's been telling Mother that sad, sweet story of his life in French, and she said, would you be kind enough to come directly if you were at home? He has a dreadful cough, and he's been crying. The doctor smiled. Oh, don't, said Bobby. Please don't. You wouldn't if you'd seen him. I never saw a man cry before. You don't know what it's like. Dr. Forrest wished then that he hadn't smiled. When Bobby and the doctor got to the Three Chimneys, the Russian was sitting in the armchair that had been Father's, stretching his feet to the blaze of a bright wood fire, and sipping the tea Mother had made him.
The man seems worn out, mind and body, was what the doctor said. The cough's bad, but there's nothing that can't be cured. He ought to go straight to bed, though, and let him have a fire at night.
Yeah, I keep feeling nervous and suspicious of all these adults, and then I remember that, yeah, this was back when, like, you just unquestioningly took the hand of an adult or got into a stranger's cart, or, yeah, I know.
I'll make one in my room. That's the only one with a fireplace, said Mother. She did, and presently the doctor helped the stranger to bed. There was a big black trunk in Mother's room that none of the children had ever seen unlocked. Now, when she had lighted the fire, she unlocked it and took some clothes out, men's clothes, and set them to air by the newly lighted fire. Bobby, coming in with more wood for the fire, saw the mark on the nightshirt and looked over to the open trunk. All the things she could see were men's clothes, and the name marked on the shirt was Father's name. Then Father hadn't taken his clothes with him, and that nightshirt was one of Father's new ones. Bobby remembered its being made just before Peter's birthday. Why hadn't Father taken his clothes? Bobby slipped from the room, and as she went, she heard the key turned in the lock of the trunk. Her heart was beating horribly. Why hadn't Father taken his clothes? When Mother came out of the room, Bobby flung tightly clasping arms around her waist and whispered, "Mother, Daddy isn't dead, is he?" "My darling, no. What makes you think of anything so horrible?" I don't know," said Bobby, angry with herself, but still clinging to that resolution of hers not to see anything that Mother didn't mean her to see. Mother gave her a hurried hug. "Daddy was quite well last I heard from him," she said, "and he'll come back to us some day. Don't fancy such horrible things, darling." Later on, when the Russian stranger had been made comfortable for the night, Mother came into the girls' room. She was to sleep there in Phyllis's bed, and Phyllis was to have a mattress on the floor. A most amusing adventure for Phyllis. Directly Mother came in, 2 white figures started up and 2 eager voices called, "Now, Mother, tell us about the Russian gentleman." A white shape hopped into the room. It was Peter, dragging his quilt behind him like the tail of a white peacock. "We have been patient," he said, "and I had to bite my tongue not to go to sleep. And I just nearly went to sleep, and I bit too hard, and it hurts ever so. Do tell us. Make a nice long story of it." "I can't make a long story of it tonight," said Mother. "I'm very tired." Bobby knew by her voice that Mother had been crying, but the others didn't know. "Well, make it as long as you can," said Phil, and Bobby got her arms around Mother's waist and snuggled close to her. "Well, it's a story long enough to make a whole book of. He's a writer. He's written wonderful books. In Russia, at the time of the Tsar, one dared not say anything about the rich people doing wrong, or about the things that ought to be done to make poor people better and happier. If one did, one was sent to prison." "But they can't," said Peter. "People only go to prison when they've done wrong." "Or when judges think they've done wrong," said Mother. "Yes, that's so in England. But in Russia it was very different, and he wrote a beautiful book about poor people and how to help them. I've read it. There's nothing in it but goodness and kindness, and they sent him to prison for it. He was 3 years in a horrible dungeon with hardly any light and all damp and dreadful, in prison all alone for 3 years. Mother's voice trembled a little and stopped suddenly. "But, Mother," said Peter, "that can't be true now. It sounds like something out of a history book, the Inquisition or something." "It was true," said Mother. "It's all horribly true. Well, then they took him out and sent him to Siberia, a convict chained to other convicts, wicked men who'd done all sorts of crimes, a long chain of them, and they walked and walked and walked for days and weeks, till he thought they'd never stop walking, and overseers went behind them with whips, yes, whips, to beat them if they got tired, and some of them went lame, and some fell down, and when they couldn't get up and go on, they beat them and left them to die. Oh, it's all too terrible. And at last he got to the mines, and he was condemned to stay there for life, just for writing a good, noble, splendid book. How did he get away? When the war came, some of the Russian prisoners were allowed to volunteer as soldiers, and he volunteered, but he deserted at the first chance he got, and... "But that's very cowardly, isn't it?" said Peter. "To desert, especially when it's war. Do you think he owed anything to a country that had done that to him? If he did, he owed more to his wife and children. He didn't know what had become of them." "Oh," cried Bobby. "He had them to think about and be miserable about too, then, all the time he was in prison." "Yes, and he had them to think about and be miserable about all the time he was in prison. For anything he knew, they might have been sent to prison too, for they did those things in Russia. But while he was in the mines, some French managed to get a message to him that his wife and children had escaped and come to England. So when he deserted, he came here to look for them." "Had he got their address?" said practical Peter. "No, just England. He was going to London. He thought he had to change at our station, and then he found he'd lost his ticket and his purse. Oh, do you think he'll find them? I mean his wife and children, not the ticket and things. I hope so. Oh, I hope and pray that he'll find his wife and children again. Even Phyllis now perceived that Mother's voice was very unsteady. My mother, she said, how very sorry you seem to be for him. Mother didn't answer for a minute. Then she just said, yes. And then she seemed to be thinking. The children were quiet. Presently she said, Dears, when you say your prayers, I think you might ask God to show his pity upon all prisoners and captives. To show his pity, Bobby repeated slowly, upon all prisoners and captives. Is that right, Mother? Yes, said Mother, upon all prisoners and captives. All prisoners and captives. Chapter 6. Saviors of the Train. The Russian gentleman was better the next day, and the day after that better still. And on the third day he was well enough to come into the garden. A basket chair was put for him, and he sat there dressed in clothes of Father's, which were too big for him, but when Mother had hemmed up all the ends of the sleeves and the trousers, the clothes did well enough. He was a kind face now that it was no longer tired and frightened, and he smiled at the children whenever he saw them. They wished very much that he could speak English. Mother wrote several letters to people she thought might know whereabouts in England a Russian gentleman's wife and family might possibly be, not to the people she used to know before she came to live at Three Chimneys. She never wrote to any of them, but strange people, members of Parliament and editors of papers and secretaries of societies. And she did not do much of her story writing, only correct proofs that she sat in the sun near the Russian, and talked to him every now and then. The children wanted very much to show how kindly they felt to this man who had been sent to prison and to Siberia just for writing a beautiful book about poor people. They could smile at him, of course. They could, and they did. But if you smile too constantly, the smile is apt to get fixed like the smile of the hyena, and then it no longer looks friendly, but simply silly. So they tried other ways. They brought him flowers, till the place where he sat was surrounded by little fading bunches of clover and roses and Canterbury bells. And then Phyllis had an idea. She beckoned mysteriously to the others and drew them into the backyard, and there, in a concealed spot between the pump and the water butt, she said, You remember Perks promising me the very first strawberries out of his own garden. Perks, you will recollect, was the porter. Well, I think they're right now. Let's go down and see. Mother had been down as she had promised to tell the station master the story of the Russian prisoner, but even the charms of the railway had been unable to tear the children away from the neighborhood of the interesting stranger. So they had not been to the station for 3 days. They went now, and to their surprise and distress were very coldly received by Perk. Highly honoured, I'm sure, he said when they peeped in at the door of the porter's room, and he went on reading his newspaper. There was an uncomfortable silence. Oh dear, said Bobby with a sigh. I do believe you're cross. What, me? Not me, says Perks loftily. It ain't nothing to me. What ain't nothing to you? Said Peter, too anxious and alarmed to change the form of words. Nothing ain't nothing. What happens here or elsewhere, said Perks. If you likes to have your secrets, have 'em and welcome. That's what I say. The secret chamber of each heart was rapidly examined during the pause that followed. 3 heads were shaken. We haven't got any secrets from you, said Bobby at last. Maybe you have, and maybe you haven't, said Perks. Ain't nothing to me, and I wish you all a very good afternoon. He held up the paper between him and them and went on reading. Oh, don't, said Phyllis in despair. This is truly dreadful, whatever it is. Do tell us. We didn't mean to do whatever it was. No answer. The paper was refolded, and Perks began on another column. Look here, said Peter suddenly. It's not fair. Even people who do crimes aren't punished without being told what it's for. And once they were in Russia. I don't know nothing about Russia. Oh, yes, you do, when Mother came down on purpose to tell you and Mr. Gills all about our Russian. Can't you fancy it, said Perks indignantly. Don't you see I'm a-asking of me to step into his room and take a chair and listen to what her ladyship has to say? Do you mean to say you've not heard? Not so much of a breath. I did go as far as to put a question, and he shuts me up like a rat trap. Affairs of state, Perks, says he, but I did think one of you would have nipped down and told me. Your ear is sharp enough when you want to get anything out of old Perks. Phyllis flushed purple at the thought of the strawberries. Information about locomotives or signals. Oh, information about locomotives or signals or the likes, said Perks.
We didn't know you didn't know. We thought Mother had told you. We wanted to tell you, only we thought it would be stale news.
The three spoke all at once. Perks said it was all very well and still held up the paper. Then Phyllis suddenly snatched it away and threw her arms around his neck.
Oh, let's kiss and be friends, she said. We'll say we're sorry first if you like, but we really didn't know that you didn't know.
We are so sorry, said the others, and Perks at last consented to accept their apologies. Then they got him to come out and sit in the sun on the green railway bank, where the grass was quite hot to touch, and there, sometimes speaking one at a time, and sometimes all together, they told the porter the story of the Russian prisoner.
Well, I must say,
said Perks, but he did not say it, whatever it was.
Yes, it is pretty awful, isn't it? Said Peter, and I don't wonder you were curious about who the Russian was.
I wasn't curious, not so much as interested, said the porter.
Well, I do think Mr. Gills might have told you about it. It was horrid of him.
Oh, don't keep no down on him for that, missy, said the porter. 'Cause why? I see his reasons. He wouldn't want to give away his own side with a tale like that here. It ain't human nature. Man's got to stand up for his own side, whatever they does. That's what it means by potty politics. I should do or done the same myself with that long-haired chap, and a been a jet. Hi, Shalaris. How's it going? There's some terms here that are not. that are old.
But the Japanese didn't do cruel, wicked things like that, said Bobby.
Perhaps not, said Perks cautiously. Still, you can't be sure. My own belief is they're all tarred with the same brush.
Then why were you on the side of the Japanese? Said Peter asked.
Well, you see, you must take one side or the other. Same as with the Liberals and Conservatives. The great thing is to take your side and then stick to it, whatever happens. A signal sounded. There's a 3:14 up, said Perks. You lie low till she's through, and then we'll go up along my place and see if there's any of them strawberries ripe, what I told you about.
If there are any ripe, and you do give them to me, said Phyllis, you won't mind if I give them to the poor Russian, will you?
Perks narrowed his eyes and then raised his eyebrows. So it was them strawberries you came down for this afternoon, eh? This was an awkward moment for Phyllis. To say yes would seem rude and greedy and unkind to Perks, but she knew if she said no, she would not be pleased with herself afterwards, so...
Yes, she said, it was.
Well done, said the porter. Pete, speak the truth and shame that...
But we'd have come down the very next day if we'd known you hadn't heard the story, Phyllis added hastily.
I believe you, missy, said Perks, and sprang across the line 6 feet in front of the advancing train. The girls hated to see him do this, but Peter liked it. It was so exciting. The Russian gentleman was so delightful with the strawberries that the three racked their brains to find some other surprise for him. But all the racking did not bring out any idea more novel than wild cherries. And this idea occurred to them next morning. They had seen the blossom on the trees in the spring, and they knew where to look for wild cherries, now that cherry time was here. The trees grew all up and along the rocky face of the cliff, out of which the mouth of the tunnel opened. Uh-oh. Going to do a late night stream. Ooh, fun. This is our story stream, so I've been reading The Railway Children, which I have not read before. Sorry, I'm going to move the camera just briefly. I realized I'm not very centered here.
What are you streaming tonight, Shalaris?
There were all sorts of trees there, birches and beeches and baby oaks and hazels, and among them the cherry blossoms had shone like snow in silver.
Ah, weaving, okay.
The mouth of the tunnel was some way from the 3 chimneys, so Mother let them take their lunch with them in a basket, and the basket would do to bring the cherries back in if they found any. She also lent them her silver watch so that they should not be late for tea. Peter's Waterbury had taken into its head not to go since the day when Peter dropped it into the water butt, and they started. When they got to the top of the cutting, they leaned over the fence and looked down to where the railway lines lay at the bottom of what, as Phyllis said, was exactly like a mountain gorge.
If it wasn't for the railway at the bottom, it would be as though the foot of a man had never been there, would it?
The sides of the cutting were of grey stone, very roughly hewn indeed. The top part of the cutting had been a little natural glen that had been cut deeper to bring it down to the level of the tunnel's mouth. Among the rocks, grass and flowers grew, and seeds dropped by birds in the crannies of the stone had taken root and grown into bushes and trees that overhung the cutting. Near the tunnel was a flight of steps leading down to the line, just wooden bars roughly fixed into the earth, a very steep and narrow way, more like a ladder than a stair. "We'd better get down," said Peter. "I'm sure the cherries wouldn't be quite easy to get at from the side of the steps. You remember it was there we picked the cherry blossoms that we put on the rabbit's grave." So they went along the fence towards the little swing gate that is at the top of these steps, and they were almost at the gate when Bobby said, "Hush! Stop! What's that?" That was a very odd noise indeed, a soft noise, but quite plainly to be heard through the sound of the wind in the branches, and the hum and whir of the telegraph wires. It was a sort of rustling, whispering sound. As they listened, it stopped, and then it began again. And this time it did not stop, but it grew louder and more rustling and rumbling. "Look!" cried Peter suddenly. "The tree over there!" The tree he pointed at was one of those that have rough gray leaves and white flowers. The berries, when they come, are bright scarlet, but if you pick them, they disappoint you by turning black before you get them home. And as Peter pointed, the tree was moving, not just the way trees ought to move when the wind blows through them, but all in one piece as though it were a live creature and were walking down the side of the cutting. "It's moving!" cried Bobby. "Oh, look! And so are the others! It's like the woods in Macbeth!" "It's magic!" said Phyllis breathlessly. "I always knew the railway was enchanted." It really did seem like a little magic, for all the trees for about 20 yards of the opposite bank seemed to be slowly walking down towards the railway line, the tree with the grey leaves bringing up the rear like some old shepherd driving a flock of green sheep. "What is it? Oh, what is it?" said Phyllis. "It's much too magic for me. I don't like it. Let's go home." But Bobby and Peter clung fast to the rail and watched breathlessly, and Phyllis made no movement towards going home by herself. The trees moved on and on. Some stones and loose earth fell down and rattled on the railway metals far below. "It's all coming down," Peter tried to say, but he found there was hardly any voice to say it with, and indeed, just as he spoke, the great rock on the top of which the walking trees were leaned slowly forward. The trees ceased to walk, stood still, and shivered. Leaning with the rock, they seemed to hesitate a moment. Then the rock and trees and grass and bushes with a rushing sound slipped right away from the face of the cutting and fell on the line with a blundering crash that could have been heard half a mile off. A cloud of dust rode up. "Oh," said Peter in awestruck tones. "Isn't it exactly like when coals come in? If there wasn't any roof to the cellar and you could see down?" "Look what a great mound it's made," said Bobby. "Yes, it's right across the down line," said Phyllis. "That'll take some sweeping up," said Bobby. "Yes," said Peter slowly. He was still leaning on the fence. "Yes," he said again, still more slowly. Then he stood upright. "The 11:29 hasn't gone by yet. We must let them know at the station or there'll be a most frightful accident." "Let's run," said Bobby, and began. But Peter cried, "Come back!" and looked at Mother's watch. He was very prompt and businesslike, and his face looked whiter than they'd ever seen it. "No time," he said. "It's 10 miles away and it's past 11. "Couldn't we," suggested Phyllis breathlessly, "couldn't we climb up a telegraph post and do something to the wires?" "We don't know how," said Peter. "They do it in war," said Phyllis. "I know, I've heard of it." "They'll only cut them, silly," said Peter, "and that doesn't do any good. And we couldn't cut them even if we got up, and we couldn't get up. If we had anything red, we could go down on the line and wave it. But the train wouldn't see it till it got round the corner, and by then it could be seen in the mound just as well as us," said Phyllis. "Better, because it's much bigger than us." "Ah, if only we had something red," Peter repeated. "We could go round the corner and wave to the train." "We might wave anyway. They'll only think it was just us, as usual. We've waved so often before. Anyway, let's get down." They got down the steep stairs. Bobby was pale and shivering. Peter's face looked thinner than usual. Phyllis was red-faced and damp with anxiety. "Oh, how hot I am," she said. "And I thought it was going to be cold. I wish we hadn't put on a—" She stopped short and then ended in quite a different tone. "Our flannel petticoats." Bobby turned at the bottom of the stairs. "Oh, yes," she cried. "They're red. Let's take them off." They did, and with the petticoats rolled up under their arms along the railway, skirting the newly fallen mound of stones and rock and earth, and bent, crushed, twisted trees, they ran at their best pace. Peter led, but the girls were not far behind. They reached the corner that hid the mound from the straight line of railway, and ran half a mile without curve or corner. "Now," said Peter, taking hold of the largest flannel petticoat. You're not going to tear them?" Shut up, said Peter with a brief sternness. Oh, yes, said Bobby. Tear them into little bits if you like. Don't you see, Phil? If we can't stop the train, there'll be a real live accident with people killed. Oh, horrible. Here, Peter, you'll never tear through the band. She took the red flannel petticoat from him and tore it off an inch from the band. Then she tore the other in the same way. There, said Peter, tearing his in turn. He divided each petticoat into 3 pieces. Now we've got 6 flags. He looked at the watch again. And we've got 7 minutes. We must have flagstaffs. The knives given to boys are, for some odd reason, seldom of the kind of steel that keeps sharp. The young saplings had to be broken off. 2 came up by the roots. The leaves were stripped from them. We must cut holes in the flags and run the sticks through the holes, said Peter, and the holes were cut. The knife was sharp enough to cut flannel with. The 2 of the flags were set up in heaps of loose stones beneath the sleepers of the down line. Then Phyllis and Roberta took each flag and stood ready to wave as soon as the train came in sight. I shall have the other 2 myself, said Peter, because it was my idea to wave something red. There are petticoats, so, Phyllis was beginning, but Bobby interrupted. Oh, what does it matter who waves what? We can only save the train. Perhaps Peter had not rightly calculated the number of minutes it would take the 11:29 to get from the station to the place where they were, or perhaps the train was late. Anyways, it seemed a very long time that they waited. Phyllis grew impatient. I expect that watch is wrong, and the train's gone by, she said. Peter relaxed the heroic attitude he had chosen to show off his 2 flags, and Bobby began to feel sick with suspense. It seemed to her that they had been standing there for hours and hours holding those silly little red flannel flags, and no one would ever notice. The train wouldn't care. It would go rushing by them and tear around the corner and go crashing into that awful mound, and everyone would be killed. Her hands grew very cold and trembled so that she could hardly hold the flag. And then came the distant rumble and hum of the metals, and a puff of white steam showed far away along the stretch of line. Stand firm, said Peter, and wave like mad. When it gets to that big furze bush, step back, but go on waving. Don't stand on the line, Bobby. The train came rattling along very, very fast. They don't see us. They won't see us. It's all no good, cried Bobby. The 2 little flags on the line swayed as the nearing train shook and loosened the heaps of loose stones that held them up. One of them slowly leaned over and fell on the line. Bobby jumped forward and caught it up and waved it. Her hands did not tremble now. It seemed that the train came on as fast as ever. It was very near now. Keep off the line, you silly cuckoo, said Peter, fiercely. It's no good, Bobby said again. Stand back, cried Peter suddenly, and he dragged Phyllis back by the arm. But Bobby cried, not yet, and waved her 2 flags right over the line. The front of the engine looked black and enormous. Its voice was loud and harsh. Oh, stop, 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 cried Bobby. No one heard her. At least Peter and Phyllis didn't, for the oncoming rush of the train covered the sound of her voice with a mountain of sound. But afterwards she used to wonder whether the engine itself had not heard her. It seemed almost as though it had, for it slackened swiftly, slackened and stopped, not 20 yards from the place where Bobby's 2 flags waved over the line. She saw the great black engine stop dead, but somehow she could not stop waving the flags, and when the driver and the fireman had got off the engine, and Peter and Phyllis had gone to meet them and pour out their excited tale of the awful mound just round the corner, Bobby still waved the flags, but more and more feebly and jerkily. When the others turned towards her, she was lying across the line with her hands flung forward and still gripping the sticks of the little red flannel flags. The engine driver picked her up, carried her to the train, and laid her on the cushions of a first-class carriage. Gone right off in a faint, he said. Poor little woman. And no wonder. I'll just have a look at this here mound of yours, and then we'll run you back to the station and get her seen to. It was horrible to see Bobby lying so white and quiet with her lips blue and parted. I believe that's what people look like when they're dead, whispered Phyllis. Don't, said Peter sharply. They sat by Bobby on the blue cushions, and the train ran back. Before it reached their station, Bobby sighed and opened her eyes and rolled herself over and began to cry. This cheered the others wonderfully. They had seen her cry before, but they had never seen her faint, nor anyone else for the matter of that. They had not known what to do when she was fainting, and now she was only crying. They could thump her on the back and tell her not to, just as they always did. And presently, when she stopped crying, they were able to laugh at her for being such a coward as to faint. When the station was reached, the 3 were the heroes of an agitated meeting on the platform. The praises they got for the prompt action, their common sense, their ingenuity, were enough to have turned anybody's head. Phyllis enjoyed herself thoroughly. She had never been a real heroine before, and the feeling was delicious. Peter's ears got very red, yet he too enjoyed himself. Only Bobby wished they all wouldn't. She wanted to get away. You'll hear from the company about this, I expect, said the station master. Bobby wished she might never hear of it again. She pulled at Pete's jacket. Oh, come away, I want to go home. she said. So they went, and as they went, station master and porter and guards and driver and firemen and passengers sent up a cheer.
Oh, listen, cried Phyllis. That's for us.
Yes, said Peter. I say, I am glad I thought about something red and waving it.
How lucky we did put on our red flannel petticoats, said Phyllis.
Bobby said nothing. She was thinking of the horrible mound and the trustful train rushing towards it.
And it was us that saved them, said Peter. How dreadful if they'd all been killed, said Phyllis. Wouldn't it, Bobby?
Oh, we never got any cherries after all, said Bobby. The others thought her rather heartless. Well, it is 10 o'clock, and we've reached halfway. Chapter 7. I'll read this one last chapter, and then I think we will have to save the rest for another day. Chapter 7. For Valor. I hope you don't mind my telling you a good deal about Roberta. The fact is, I am growing very fond of her. The more I observe her, the more I love her, and I notice all sorts of things about her that I like. I do stream tomorrow. It's a pet sketch stream tomorrow afternoon, Shalaris. For instance, she was quite oddly anxious to make other people happy, and she could keep a secret, a tolerably rare accomplishment. Also, she had the power of silent sympathy. That sounds rather dull, I know, but it's not so dull as it sounds. It just means that a person is able to know that you are unhappy and to love you extra on that account, without bothering you by telling you all the time how sorry she is for you. That was what Bobby was like. She knew that Mother was unhappy, and that Mother had not told her the reason, so she just loved Mother more, and never said a single word that could let Mother know how earnestly her little girl wondered what Mother was unhappy about. This needs practice. It is not so easy as you might think. Whatever happened, and all sorts of nice, pleasant, ordinary things happened, such as picnics, games, and buns for tea, Bobby always had these thoughts at the back of her mind. Mother is unhappy. Why? I don't know. She doesn't want me to know. I won't try to find out. But she is unhappy. Why? I don't know. She doesn't. And so on, repeating and repeating like a tune that you don't know the stopping part of. The Russian gentleman still took up a good deal of everybody's thoughts. All the editors and secretaries of societies and members of Parliament had answered Mother's letters as politely as they knew how, but none of them could tell where the wife and children of Mr. Syspansky would be likely to be. Did I tell you that the very Russian's name was that? Bobby had another quality which you will hear differently described by different people. Some of them call it interfering in other people's business, and some call it helping lame dogs over stiles, and some call it loving kindness. It just means trying to help people. She racked her brains to think of some way of helping the Russian gentleman to find his wife and children. He had learned a few words of English now. He could say good morning and good night, and please and thank you, and pretty when the children brought him flowers, and very good when they asked how he had slept. The way he smiled when he said his English was, Bobby felt, just too sweet for anything. She used to think of his face because she fancied it would help her to some way of helping him, but it did not. Yet his being there cheered her because she saw that it made Mother happier. She likes to have someone to be good to, even besides us, said Bobby, and I know she hated to let him have Father's clothes, but I suppose it hurt nice, or she wouldn't have. For many and many a night after the day when she and Peter and Phyllis had saved the train from wreck by waving their little red flannel flags, Bobby used to wake screaming and shivering, seeing again that horrible mound, and the poor dear trustful engine rushing on toward it, just thinking that it was doing its swift duty, and that everything was clear and safe, and then a warm thrill of pleasure used to run through her at the remembrance of how she and Peter and Phyllis and the red flannel petticoats had really saved everybody. One morning a letter came. It was addressed to Peter and Bobby and Phyllis. They opened it with enthusiastic curiosity, for they did not often get letters. The letter said, "Dear Sir and Ladies, it is proposed to make a small presentation to you in commemoration of your prompt and courageous action in warning the train on the instance, and thus averting what must, humanly speaking, have been a terrible accident. The presentation will take place at the station at 3 o'clock on the 30th instantly. I don't know what inst is. If this time and place will be convenient to you. Yours faithfully, Jabez Inglewood, Secretary, Great Northern and Southern Railway Company." There never had been a prouder moment in the lives of the three children. They rushed to Mother with the letter, and she also felt proud and said so, and this made the children happier than ever. But if the presentation is money, you must say thank you, but we'd rather not take it, said Mother. I'll wash your muslins at once, she added. You must look tidy on an occasion like this. Phil and I can wash them, said Bobby, if you'll iron them, Mother. Washing is rather fun. I wonder whether you've ever done it. This particular washing took place in the back kitchen, which had a stone floor and a very big stone sink under its window. Let's put the bath on the sink, said Phyllis. Then we can pretend we're out-of-doors washerwoman like Mother saw in France. But they were washing in the cold river, said Peter, his hands in his pockets, not in hot water. This is a hot river, then, said Phyllis. Lend a hand with the bath, there's a dear. I should like to see a dear lending a hand, said Peter, but he lent his. Now, to rub and scrub and scrub and rub, said Phyllis, hopping joyously about as Bobby carefully carried the heavy kettle from the kitchen fire. Oh, no, said Bobby, greatly shocked. You don't rub muslin. You put the boiled soap in the hot water and make it all frothy lathery. Then you shake the muslin and squeeze it ever so gently, and all the dirt comes out. It's only clumsy things like tablecloths and sheets that have to be rubbed. The lilac and the Gloire and de Dijon roses outside the window swayed in the soft breeze. It's a nice drying day, that's one thing, said Bobby, feeling very grown up. Oh, I do wonder what wonderful feelings we shall have when we wear the muslin dresses. Yes, so do I, said Phyllis, shaking and squeezing the muslin in quite a professional manner. Now we squeeze out the soapy water. No, we mustn't twist them, and then rinse them. I'll hold them while you and Peter empty the bath water and get clean water. A presentation, that means presents, said Peter, as his sisters, having duly washed their pegs and wiped the line, hung up the dresses to dry. Whatever will it be? It might be anything, said Phyllis. What I've always wanted is a baby elephant. But I suppose they wouldn't know that. Suppose it was a gold model of steam engines, said Bobby. Or a big model of the scene of the prevented accident, suggested Peter, with a little model train and dolls dressed like us, and the engine driver and firemen and passengers. Do you like, said Bobby doubtfully, drying her hands on the rough towel that hung on a roller at the back of the scullery door. Do you like us being rewarded for saving a train? Yes, I do, said Peter downrightly. And don't you try to come out over us that you don't like it too, because I know you do. Yes, said Bobby doubtfully, I know I do. But oughtn't we be satisfied with just having done it, and not ask for anything more? Who did ask for anything more, silly? Said her brother. Victoria Cross soldiers don't ask for it, but they're glad enough to get it all the same. Perhaps it'll be medals. Then, when I'm very old indeed, I shall show them to my grandchildren and say we only did our duty. And they'll be awfully proud of me. You'd have to be married, warned Phyllis. Or you don't have any grandchildren. I suppose I shall have to be married some day, said Peter, but it would be an awful bother having her around all the time. I'd like to marry a lady who had trances and only woke up once or twice a year. Yikes, Peter. He is a fart. Just to say you were the light of her life and then go to sleep again. Yes, that wouldn't be bad, said Bobby. When I get married, said Phyllis, I shall want him to want me to be awake all the time so that I can hear him say how nice I am. I think it would be nice, said Bobby, to marry someone very poor, and then you'd do all the work, and he'd love you most frightfully, and see the blue wood smoke curling up among the trees from the domestic hearth as he came home from work every night. I say, we've got to answer that letter and say that the time and place will be convenient to us. There's the soap, Peter. We're both as clean as clean. That pink book of writing paper you had on your birthday, Phil. It took some time to arrange what should be said. Mother had gone back to her writing, and several sheets of pink paper with scalloped gilt edges and green four-leaf shamrocks on the corner were spoiled before the three had decided what to say. Then each made a copy and signed it with its own name. The threefold letter ran, Dear Mr. Jabez Inglewood, thank you very much. We did not want to be rewarded, but only to save the train. But we are glad you think so, and thank you very much. The time and place you say will be quite convenient to us. Thank you very much. Your efficient little friend. Then came the name, and after it, P.S. Thank you very much. Washing is much easier than ironing, said Bobby, taking the clean dresses off the line. I do love to see things come clean. Oh, I don't know how we shall wait till it's time to know what the presentation they're going to present. When at last, it seemed a very long time after, it was the day, the three children went down to the station at the proper time, and everything that happened was so odd that it seemed like a dream. The station master came out to meet them in his best clothes, as Peter noticed at once, and led them into the waiting room, where once they had played the advertisement game, it looked quite different now. A carpet had been put down, and there were pots of roses on the mantelpiece and on the window ledges, green branches stuck up like holly and laurel at Christmas, over the framed advertisement of Cook's Tours and the Beauties of Devon and the Paris-Lyons Railway. There were quite a number of people there besides the porter, 2 or 3 ladies in smart dresses, and quite a crowd of gentlemen in high hats and frock coats, besides everybody who belonged to the station. They recognized several people who had been in the train on the red flannel petticoat day. Best of all, their own old gentleman was there, and his coat and hat and collar seemed more than ever different from anyone else's. He shook hands with them, and then everybody sat down on chairs, and a gentleman in spectacles, they found afterwards that he was the district superintendent, began quite a long speech. Very clever indeed. I had to dip out for a minute because I'm working late tonight. I hope these 3 little children didn't fall in harm's way. They tore off their red petticoats and stopped a train from crashing into a landslide. So this is the ceremony for them saving the train. They're rascals. That's true. Very long, very clever indeed. I am not going to write the speech down. First, because you would think it dull, and secondly, because it made all the children blush so, and get so hot about the ears, that I am quite anxious to get away from this part of the subject, and thirdly, because the gentleman took so many words to say what he had to say, that I really haven't time to write them down. He said all sorts of nice things about the children's bravery and presence of mind, and when he had done, he sat down, and everyone who was there clapped and said, "Hear, hear." And then the old gentleman got up and said things too. It was very like a prize giving. Then he called the children one by their names, and gave each of them a beautiful gold watch and chain, and inside the watches were engraved after the name of the watch's new owner. From the directors of the Northern and Southern Railway, in grateful recognition of the courageous and prompt action which averted an accident on 1905. The watches were the most beautiful you could possibly imagine, and each one had a blue leather case to live in when it was at home. "You must make a speech now, and thank everyone for their kindness," whispered the station master in Peter's ear, and pushed him forward. "Begin, ladies and gentlemen," he added. Each of the children had already said thank you quite properly. "Oh dear," said Peter, but he did not resist the push. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a rather husky voice. Then there was a pause, and he heard his heart beating in his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he went on with a rush, "it's most awfully good of you, and we shall treasure the watches all our lives, but really we don't deserve it, because what we did wasn't anything really. At least, I mean, it was awfully exciting, and what I mean to say, thank you all very, very much." The people clapped Peter more than they had done the district superintendent, and then everybody shook hands with them, and as soon as politeness would let them, they got away and tore up the hill to the 3 Chimneys with their watches in their hands. It was a wonderful day, the kind of day that very seldom happens to anybody, and most of us not at all. "Oh, I did want to talk to the old gentleman about something else," said Bobby, "but it was so public, like being in church." "What did you want to say?" asked Phyllis. "I'll tell you what I've thought about it more," said Bobby. So when she had thought a little more, she wrote a letter. "My dearest old gentleman," it said, "I want most awfully to ask you something. If you could get out of the train and go by the next, it would do. I do not want you to give me anything. Mother says we ought not to. And besides, we do not want any things, only to talk to you about a prisoner and captive. Your loving little friend, Bobby." She got the station master to give the letter to the old gentleman, and next day she asked Peter and Phyllis to come down to the station with her at the time when the train that brought the old gentleman from town would be passing through. She explained her idea to them, and they approved thoroughly. They had all washed their hands and faces and brushed their hair, and were looking as tidy as they knew how, but Phyllis, always unlucky, had upset a jug of lemonade down the front of her dress. There was no time to change, and the wind happened to blow from the coal yard. Her frock was soon powdered with grey, which stuck to the sticky lemonade stains and made her look, as Peter said, like any little gutter child. It was decided that she should keep behind the others as much as possible. "Perhaps the old gentleman won't notice," said Bobby. "The aged are often weak in the eyes." They didn't even have slap bracelets then? No, they did not.
There was no sign of weakness, however, in the eyes or in any other part of the old gentleman as he stepped from the train and looked up and down the platform. The three children, now that it came to the point, suddenly felt that rush of deep shyness which makes your ears red and hot, your hands warm and wet, and the tip of your nose pink and shiny.
"Oh," said Phyllis, "my heart's something like the steam engine right under my sash, too."
"Nonsense," said Peter. "People's hearts aren't under their sashes."
"I don't care, mine is," said Phyllis.
"Oh, if you're going to talk like a poetry book," said Peter, "my heart's in my mouth."
"My heart's in my boots, if you come to that," said Roberta. "But do come on, he'll think we're idiots."
"We won't be far wrong," said Peter gloomily, and they went forward to meet the old gentleman.
"Hello,"
he said, shaking hands with them all in turn.
"This is a very great pleasure."
"It was good of you to get out,"
Bobby said, perspiring and polite. He took her arm and drew her into the waiting room where she and the others had played the advertisement game the day they found the Russian. Phyllis and Peter followed.
"Well,"
said the old gentleman, giving Bobby's arm a kind little shake before he let it go.
"well, what is it?"
"Oh, please,"
said Bobby.
"Yes?"
said the old gentleman.
"What I mean to say,"
said Bobby.
"Yes?"
said the old gentleman.
"it's all very nice and kind," said she.
"But,"
he said.
"I wish I might say something,"
said she.
"Say it,"
said he.
"Well then,"
said Bobby, and out came the story of the Russian who had written the beautiful book about poor people and had been sent to prison and to Siberia for just that.
"And what we want more than anything in the world is to find his wife and children for him," said Bobby. "But we don't know how. But you must be most horribly clever, or you wouldn't be a direction of the railway, and if you knew how and would, we'd rather have than anything else in the world. We'd go without watches, even if you could sell them and find his wife with the money."
And the others said so too, though not with so much enthusiasm. Said the old gentleman, pulling down the white waistcoat that had the big gilt buttons on it.
"What did you say his name was? Frying Pansky?"
No, said Bobby earnestly. "I'll write it down for you. It doesn't really look at all like that, except when you say it. Having you a bit of pencil at the back of an envelope?" she asked.
The old gentleman got out a gold pencil case and a beautiful sweet-smelling green Russian leather notebook, and opened it to a new page.
"Here," he said. "Write it here."
She wrote down Shapensky,
and said, "That is how you write it. You call it Shapensky."
The old gentleman took out a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles and fitted them on his nose. When he had read the name, he looked quite different.
"That man! Bless my soul," he said. "Why, I've read his book. It's translated into every European language. A fine book, a noble book. And so your mother took him in, like the Good Samaritan. Well, I'll tell you what, youngsters, your mothers must be a very good woman."
"Of course she is,"
said Phyllis in astonishment.
"And you are a very good man,"
said Bobby, very shy but firmly resolved to be polite.
"You flatter me,"
said the old gentleman, taking off his hat with a flourish.
"And now I am to tell you what I think of you."
"Oh, please don't," said Bobby hastily.
"Why?"
asked the old gentleman.
"I don't exactly know," said Bobby. "Only if it's horrid, I don't want you to, and if it's nice, I'd rather you didn't."
The old gentleman laughed.
"Well then,"
he said,
"I'll only just say that I'm very glad you came to me about this. Very glad indeed, and I shouldn't be surprised if I found out something very soon. I know a great many Russians in London, and every Russian knows his name. Now, tell me all about yourselves."
He turned to the others, but there was only one other, and that was Peter. Phyllis had disappeared.
"Tell me about yourself,"
said the old gentleman again, and quite naturally Peter was stricken dumb.
"All right, we'll have an examination," said the old gentleman. "You two sit on the table, and I'll sit on the bench and ask questions."
He did, and out came their names and ages, their father's name and business, and how long they had lived at Three Chimneys, and a great deal more. The questions were beginning to turn on a herring, and a half for 3 halfpence, and a pound of lead and a pound of feathers, when the door of the waiting room was kicked open by a boot. As the boot entered, everyone could see that its lace was coming undone, and in came Phyllis very slowly and carefully. In one hand she carried a large tin can, and in the other a thick slice of bread and butter.
"Afternoon tea,"
she announced proudly, and held the can and the bread and butter out to the old gentleman, who took them and said,
"Bless my soul."
"Yes," said Phyllis.
"It's very thoughtful of you,"
said the old gentleman.
But you might have got a cup," said Bobby. And a plate.
Perks always drinks it out of the can, said Phyllis, flushing red. I think it was very nice of him to give it to me and all. Let alone cups and plates, she added.
So do I,
said the old gentleman, and he drank some of the tea and tasted the bread and butter. And then it was time for the next train, and he got onto it, with many goodbyes and kind last words. Well, said Peter when they were left on the platform and the tail lights and the train disappeared round the corner, it is my belief that we've lighted a candle today, like Latimer, you know, when he was being burned, and there'll be fireworks for our Russian before long. And so there were. It wasn't 10 days after the interview in the waiting room that the 3 children were sitting on top of the biggest rock in the field below their house, watching the 5:15 steam away from the station along the bottom of the valley. They saw, too, the few people who had got out at the station struggling up the road towards the village, and they saw one person leave the road and open the gate that led across the fields to 3 Chimneys, and to nowhere else. Who on earth? Said Peter, scrambling down. Let's go and see, said Phyllis. So they did, and when they got near enough to see who the person was, they saw it was their old gentleman himself, his brass buttons winking in the afternoon sunshine, and his white waistcoat looking whiter than ever against the green of the field. Hello! Shouted the children, waving their hands. Hello! Shouted the old gentleman, waving his hat. Then the 3 started to run, and when they got to him they hardly had breath left to say, How do you do? Good news, said he. I have found your Russian friend's wife and child, and I couldn't resist the temptation of giving myself the pleasure of telling him. But as he looked at Bobby's face, he felt that he could resist the temptation. Here, he said to her, you run on and tell him. The other 2 will show me the way. Bobby ran, but when she had breathlessly panted out the news to the Russian and Mother sitting in the quiet garden, when Mother's face had lighted up so beautifully and she had said 6 quick French words to the exile, Bobby wished that she had not carried the news, for the Russian sprang up with a cry that made Bobby's heart leap and then tremble, a cry of love and longing such as she had never heard. Then he took Mother's hand and kissed it gently and reverently. Then he sank back down in his chair and covered his face with his hands and sobbed. Bobby crept away. She did not want to see the others just then. But she was as gay as anybody when the endless French talking was over, when Peter had torn down to the village for buns and cakes, and the girls had got tea ready and taken it out to the garden. The old gentleman was most merry and delightful. He seemed to be able to talk in French and English almost at the same moment, and Mother did nearly as well. It was a delightful time. Mother seemed as if she could not make enough fuss about the old gentleman, and she said yes at once when he asked if he might present some goodies to his little friends. The word was new to the children, but they guessed that it meant sweets, for the 3 large pink and green boxes tied with green ribbon, which he took out of his bag, held unheard of layers of beautiful chocolates. The Russian's few belongings were packed, and they all saw him off at the station. Then Mother turned to the old gentleman and said, I don't know how to thank you for everything. It has been a real pleasure to me to see you, but we live very quietly. I am so sorry I can't ask you to come and see us again. The children thought this very hard. When they had made a friend, and such a friend, they would dearly have liked him to come and see them again. What the old gentleman thought they couldn't tell. He only said, I consider myself very fortunate, madam, to have been received once at your house. Ah, said Mother, I know I must seem very surly and ungrateful, but you could never seem anything but a most charming and gracious lady, said the old gentleman with another of his bows. And as they turned to go up the hill, Bobby saw her mother's face. How tired you look, Mamma, she said. Lean on me. It is my place to give Mother my arm, said Peter. I'm the head man of the family when Father's away. Mother took the arm of each. How awfully nice, said Phyllis, skipping joyfully. To think of the dear Russian embracing his long-lost wife. The baby must have grown a lot since he saw her. Yes, said Mother. I wonder whether Father will think I've grown, Phyllis went on, skipping still more gaily. I have grown already, haven't I, Mother? Yes, said Mother. Oh, yes, and Bobby and Peter. And Bobby and Peter felt her hands tighten on their arms. Poor old Mummy, you are tired, said Peter. Bobby said, Come on, Phil, I'll race you to the gate. And she started the race, though she hated doing it. You know why Bobby did that. Mother only thought that Bobby was tired of walking slowly. Even mothers who love you better than anyone else ever will don't always understand. Well, I think that is a good place to stop there. Perfect on baby Phyllis.
Absolutely clueless. Oh, that was lovely. I'm enjoying these little stories. I like this book. It's very, it's all very simple, you know? It's like a simple way to describe complicated things. It does, doesn't it? It feels like Little House on the Prairie, kind of. But it's a good, it's like a fantasy. You know what I mean? But, anyways, it's late. And I must to bed. I must away to my bed. It all works out so well, it feels like a fake book. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's like even if things are sad, it's okay. You know? Anyways, I'm not gonna raid anyone tonight. I think I will just leave it at that. But I will be streaming tomorrow. Pet sketches. I cannot wait to draw a chameleon tomorrow. That is definitely on my list of things that I want to draw. And then proper ripping. You're a right brick. And then Friday is our 12-hour stream. So we'll be playing more murder mystery, and definitely we'll get some marbles in there for sure, and maybe some fun sketching. I don't know. I'm gonna think on it, and I will post the schedule and talk about it tomorrow. I hope you can join me. Thank you so much for hanging out tonight. I had a lovely evening on our little train ride, and I hope you did too. And I will see you all soon. Take care. Have a wonderful sleep, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.